Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, people who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you. Our book today is Can We All Be Feminists? It's a collection of essays edited by Jane Eric Udori. This first chapter, or first essay, is from Charlotte Shane. It's called No Wave Feminism. If you feel like feminism is failing you, you're not alone. I sometimes have the impression that I'm as thoroughly feminist as I am thoroughly human. that feminism is as intrinsic to my contribution to my constitution as my skeleton is to my body. But in my 35 years, I've struggled with or outright rejected feminism on several occasions. First, as an ignorant adolescent, what do women need feminism for if they already got the vote? Then, as a sex worker who saw how regularly and even gleefully feminists stoked the public's long-standing antipathy toward professionally sexual women. And now, again, as someone moving even further into the far left, who cannot abide the forms of feminism that embrace and are complicit with the worst aspects of liberalism. The more I learn about the intersecting oppressive forces that continue to shape the Western world, colonialism, patriarchy, capitalism, xenophobia, and racism, and the network of cruel social machinery to which these systems give rise, incarceration, crippling debt, disenfranchisement, deportation, and so on, the less sense it makes to use gender as the primary lens through which to regard human-engineered suffering. Feminism doesn't feel like the sharpest weapon to wield against white supremacy or border policing, for instance, or even the best tool with which to approach basic civic concerns like vibrant schools. That's not because those issues don't impact women. Obviously, they directly and indirectly impact many. But they don't necessarily impact women more or in dramatically different ways than they do men. In other words, the most significant challenges these issues present aren't tethered to one's sex. And so prioritizing gender above other aspects of identity limits one's realm of ethical responses. Here's an example. American prisons often keep female prisoners shackled while they give birth. There are variations on the theme. Some women are shackled during labor, some are unshackled, but then shackled again almost immediately afterward. And almost all are shackled while heavily pregnant. There's some variation of what shackling entails, too. It can mean being cuffed at the wrists or at the ankles, or both, or cuffed to a hospital bed or chained at the waist. Articulating these details makes the sadism even starker. A class-action federal lawsuit in 2017 alleged more than 40 women at the Milwaukee County Jail suffered this horror. It was preceded by lawsuits in 2014 and 2016 against that same jail for similar practice. But the appalling practice is hardly confined to one city or one state. In 2015, New York prisons were found to be shackling prisoners in labor in spite of a state law that made it illegal to do so. And according to a 2016 report by the Prison Birth Project and Prisoners Legal Services of Massachusetts, jails and prisons in Massachusetts were guilty of similar violations. Most feminists probably agree that this is a feminist issue. The topic accordingly receives coverage on feminist websites and sometimes in women's magazines. But does a feminist obligation to attend to the rights of the imprisoned extend only as far as pregnancy and labor? Or is it a feminist issue when a non-pregnant woman is shackled? Or when she is caged for years and exploited for her labor, denied face-to-face visits from loved ones, held captive in a compound in the name of, quote, justice? If the answer to these questions is yes, then it is also a feminist issue. Then is it also a feminist issue when men are shackled during various health emergencies, seizures, say? In 2014, a male inmate in Colorado died after undergoing several seizures while in restraints and receiving no medical treatment. Is it a feminist issue when incarcerated men are denied the right to visit with family or exploited for their labor? Is it a feminist issue when so many men are raped while in prison? Or does feminism's responsibility begin and end with gender-based mistreatment? The feminists hired by prominent media outlets often advocate for measures that would result in higher levels of incarceration. They write op-eds in favor of further criminalization around sex work and call for longer prison sentences for men convicted of assault, which we've known for decades is not necessarily synonymous with men who committed the crime. They also disturbingly relish the theater of sentencing, like that enacted by Judge Rosemary Aquilina, who told serial sexual abuser Larry Nassar that if she could, she would allow some or many people to do to him what he did to others. So sexual violation is an atrocity unless it happens to the right person. They capitalize on women's justified fear and anger around mistreatment by men to shore up the status quo, to suggest that our current problems are not the result of fundamentally unjust institutions, but rather institutions that are only incidentally sexist. That means that those same institutions could become less so with the right adjustments, like more draconian sentencing for crimes against women, or more female judges. But the prison system is racist and brutal by design, not by accident or mismanagement, just as the court system regularly fails the most vulnerable because it was built to protect the powerful. The challenge of the 21st century is not to demand equal opportunity to participate in the machinery of oppression, revolutionary thinker Angela Davis has written. Rather, it is to identify and dismantle those structures. Yet leveraging our existing legal system for criminalization remains the go-to strategy for most feminists when it comes to dealing with objectionable behavior. The book, Can We All Be Feminists?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Happy Halloween, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Heck of a show today. I want to start off talking about what's up with our wealthiest. We'll get to that in just a second. Phoenix Goodman will be with us in about 15 minutes, talking about public banking and accountability. In the second hour of our program, Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, will be here for the full hour taking your calls. And in our third hour, Professor Mary Wood is going to kick off the hour with us. She is a law professor who wrote a book on the public trust, on this historic, and I mean historic like as in it stretches all the way back to the 8th century, core concept at law that underpins literally our Constitution, that the government holds the commons in trust for us and for future generations. And this is the basis of the Children's Climate lawsuit, is her legal theory. And the lawsuit is moving ahead. I mean, it just had a minor setback, but it looks like it's still moving ahead. She's going to be here to tell us about that. And then also in our third hour, an expert on vampires is here. Is a vampire apocalypse in the future? This actually, it's going to be a very informative guest. So that's our day. So I want to start with what billionaires want. There's two stories, one in The Guardian this morning and the other one on Common Dreams, that address this. They're both a result of two different studies. One was a study by the Institute for Public Policy Studies, Institute for Policy Studies, IPS. And we've had people from IPS on this program many, many times. And it's about the accumulation of wealth in the United States. And they point out that Jeff Bezos, who is, the founder of Amazon, Bill Gates, and Warren Buffett, these three guys right now have more wealth than the bottom half of America. These three men. They add, as median household wealth has declined since 1982. And by the way, household wealth is still, in the 40s, 40 grand more or less. In fact, I think in some areas it's in the 50s. But that's because more than two people now are working in the median household. You go back to 1980 when it was like 1.2 people working in the median household. And median household wealth was a little less, but median individual income was actually higher than it is right now. But in any case, as median household wealth has declined since 1982, the Walton, Koch, and Mars families, these are three families that inherited their wealth. The Koch brothers inherited their wealth from Daddy. The Walton family inherited their wealth from Sam. And the Mars family inherited their wealth from their grandfather, who founded the candy company. Those three companies since 1982 have seen their wealth grow by 6,000%. A full-time worker at Amazon making $15 an hour, in order to earn the $78.5 billion, which is the amount that Jeff Bezos has made in the last year alone. Just Jeff Bezos, in order to make that $78 billion, they would have to work 2.5 million years. Josh Hoxie, who is the co-author of the report, says today's extreme wealth inequality is perhaps greater than any time in American history. This is largely the result of rapidly growing dynasties, wealth dynasties, and a rigged economy that enables the ultra-wealthy to grow their wealth to never-before-seen highs. Chuck Collins, Institute of Policy Studies, says these families have used their wealth and power to lobby and rig the rules to expand their wealth and power. And I would point out, this is, You know, I keep going back to the Powell memo in 71, Lewis Powell being put on the Supreme Court in 72 by Richard Nixon, and then in 1976 and 78, Lewis Powell in 78, he actually authored the decision. In 76, he concurred in the decision in the cases of Buckley versus Vallejo and First National Bank versus Bellotti in 76 and 78, respectively. Those two decisions were the first time in the history of the United States, literally from the founding of the Republic until 1976, the first time in the history of the United States that the Supreme Court had ruled that giving money to a politician was a constitutionally protected right. No Congress ever proposed this. No president ever proposed this. No state ever proposed this. In fact, the opposite. Congress has passed numerous laws regulating money in politics, and they've been signed into law by numerous presidents enthusiastically. And some states even had this written into their constitution in addition to laws. All got struck down by the Supreme Court. And then this got amplified even greater in 2010 when the 5 conservatives, the 5 Republican appointees in the court, passed the Citizens United decision, and then 2013 McCutcheon, which said basically if you're a billionaire, you can own an unlimited number of politicians. Up to that point, you could only own something over 200 politicians. Seriously, there was this law. If you look at just the Kochs, the Walmart, and the Mars family, those 3 wealth dynasties, they own a combined $348 billion. Can you imagine what we could do with that? I mean, I don't want all of it. Each one of them can have, hey, let them keep $1 billion each. It's fine with me. If you look at the 15 wealthiest families with multiple members on the Forbes 400 list, the wealth of every single one of those families came from companies started by an earlier generation. Combined, those 15 families are worth $618 billion. So, and they point out, contrary to the right-wing view that the vastly unequal wealth distribution in American society is the unavoidable result of market forces. No, it's not. There's nothing inevitable about it, because once the Republicans on the Supreme Court ruled that giving money to politicians or using money to buy legislation was protected by the First Amendment, guess what? Rich people started pouring money into the coffers of politicians. And politicians have been doing what they want. Now, Benjamin Page, Jason Seawright, and Matthew Lacombe are writing over at The Guardian. They did an exhaustive study of the 100 wealthiest billionaires in the United States over a 10-year period, all of their public statements and what they're actually lobbying for. The question I'm asking here, by the way, is what do we do about our billionaire problem? We have a problem with the morbidly rich here in the United States. I personally think a wealth tax, if you have wealth in excess of $1 billion, then every year you pay 1% of everything above $1 billion to the government. I realize that's considered confiscatory, right? You know, it's literally the government taking somebody's money. But it is good for American society. It's good for democracy, and it's not going to hurt these families. You're telling me that if you've got $105 billion like the Koch brothers, and you have to pay $1 billion in taxes every year until you're down to just $1 billion, which is not going to happen in your lifetime, that's somehow going to harm you? I'm not buying it. Taking away people's health care, like Rick Scott did, that causes people to die. So what is it that the wealthiest people are doing? They looked at the 100 wealthiest billionaires in the United States over a 10-year period, and what they found was that most of America's wealthiest billionaires resemble Charles Koch politically. Quote, obsessed with cutting taxes, especially the estate tax, which only applies to the wealthiest Americans, opposed to government regulation of the environment, opposed to government regulation of big banks, unenthusiastic about government programs to help with jobs, to help maintain incomes of working people, to provide health care to American people, or for retirement pensions. They broadly oppose all these things, or they just don't care. And they're all in favor of cutting or privatizing guaranteed Social Security benefits. So the question, what do we do about this? What do we do about this? There's a lot of other stuff in the news as well. And we, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to talk with Phoenix Goodman in about 4 minutes here about public banking. Phoenix is the co-founder of Public Bank LA. We'll get to that, and then after the break at the bottom of the hour, we'll pick up your calls, and we'll be talking about what do we do about all this stuff. Plus, I've got, Mike Pence news, Donald Trump news, all sorts of news.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's coming up on 16 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. And welcome back, Omar in Herndon, Virginia. Hey, Omar, how you doing today? What's up?
I'm doing great, Tom. Thanks so much. Great to be alive and great to be in America. What I wanted to say is, all these rich billionaires, their companies, they have to provide full health benefit insurance, to their employees. And they also have to set up a savings, something like equivalent to a Social Security, because this money they accumulated, just like Elizabeth Warren said, they did not make it on their own. Along the way, there were government programs that assisted them to generate this wealth, and just for them to just completely try to stash this money, it's not. You have to give back. You have to, it's not what your country did for you is what you can do for your country. They have to invest in infrastructure, in roads, and things like that. Well, no,
I think that we as a country need to invest in those things, and I think that if somebody is morbidly rich, that they should be paying reasonable taxes. We've just cut their taxes down to nothing. It was Republican Teddy Roosevelt who wanted the inheritance tax explicitly to prevent dynastic wealth. It's amazing when you think about it. In the 1980, I think it was in 1980. This is in one of these reports. Actually, I've got the numbers right here. Let me see if I can find them and specifically share them with you. Here it is. In 1982, the Walton family was worth $690 million, which in today's dollars is $1.8 billion, and the Kochs were worth $500 million, which in today's money is $1.4 billion. So they were both worth a little less than $2 billion in today's money. Today, the Waltons are worth $169 billion, and the Kochs are worth $107 billion. A lot of that, in fact, when you read this report that was published, the majority of that increase in wealth it was basically through investment, and the reason that they were able to keep it was because they had gamed the tax laws. And you did not see these kinds of dynastic, this kind of dynastic wealth exploding in the United States in the period from 1935 until 1983 or thereabouts, because the top tax rate was 74%. Well, it was 74% from 67 forward, and it was 91% from 1933 up to 1967 or 66, whatever the year it was that LBJ lowered it to 74%. So I think if we went back to that, then we would have the money to do the roads and bridges. But what these guys are doing, Omar, is the old thing that John D. Rockefeller, his PR guy, said, go out in the street and pass out shiny dimes. And he called the newspapers, and they took pictures of it, and everybody thought, oh, Rockefeller's a philanthropist. And then he started funding, a few philanthropic things, build a theater here, pay for a library there. And suddenly it was like, oh, this is wonderful. I guess we need billionaires to pay for things for us. And they're doing the same thing right now, the Gates Foundation and all these others. Am I making sense here?
The thing is that they have to pay their share of taxes, Yeah. Just like a couple of months ago, you talked about the oil companies making a profit, but you have to give the money back to the the people that helped you, whether it's through taxes, whether it's through donation, Yeah.
And it's not just the oil companies. You see, United Healthcare just announced, I believe it was the quarterly profit of $6 billion. I mean, a health insurance company showing a multi-billion-dollar profit when it means that literally every penny of that came from saying, no, you can't have that liver transplant to somebody, or some variation thereof. Anyhow, we'll be right back. Thanks, Omar, for the call. We'll be right back with Phoenix Goodman. Stick around. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Another one of the, I was talking about the pernicious influence of billionaires on our society. I started this website long ago, nobillionaires.com. And, the other one, of course, is the big banks. And I find it bizarre that state after state after state is running literally billions of dollars in tax money and, other functions through their state every year. And that money is ending up in banks in New York who are declaring massive profits and sharing huge dividends and multi-million dollar salaries to their senior executives, when instead they could be doing like North Dakota did and have a state bank so that the profit from banking stays with the state. One of the advocates for this is Phoenix Goodman, who is the co-founder of Public Bank LA, the website publicbankla.com. You can tweet Phoenix Goodman at Phoenix_Goodman, just like Thom_Hartmann. Phoenix, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being with us. Tell us about Public Bank LA and what's going on with Measure B on the ballot in California.
Yeah, we're as you mentioned, looking to create a municipal public bank. And it's a little bit different than the state bank because it's at the local level. And that is unprecedented in the history of the United States. So we're going to take the benefits of recapturing the interest and fees that's currently extracted by Wall Street of our public funds, and then bringing that down to the local level. Now, that's on the ballot on November 6th. It's Measure B. And if that passes, that's going to amend the city charter to allow the first step in this process to continue. What we ultimately hope to do is take this a lot farther than Los Angeles. We want to spark a revolution across the entire United States where cities everywhere start declaring independence from Wall Street.
Wow. This would be an extraordinary thing. Are there any other public banks outside of North Dakota so far?
There was one that was recently chartered in American Samoa, as a matter of fact.
Wow.
It just happened very recently. One of the most notable examples is in Germany, where 40% of their banks are actually public. And they did have a disproportionate effect on their green energy boom because they were able to provide financing for their solar infrastructure. And
right.
That's the type of example that we like to see with public banking here, to identify these important policy needs. Because everything requires money, you not only want to feed what we need with appropriate financing, you want to starve what we don't want, like oil pipelines, weapons manufacturers, private prisons, by moving that money away from Wall Street.
When I lived in Germany back in the 80s, I used the post office for my banking initially, the first month or three until I opened a regular checking out bank account. And I don't know if Germany still has postal banking, but I know it's popular around the world. Bernie Sanders has been talking about it here in the United States. That would be, sort of public banking at the federal level. I'm assuming that post offices are purely federal institutions. A, do I have that all right? And B, why do you even need a Measure B on the ballot in Los Angeles to allow a public bank to be set up by the city of Los Angeles?
Okay, good question. So to answer your first question, postal banking is retail banking. So you as an individual would be able to deposit your money into a checking account, which is the public sector bank. But what we're actually looking to do is create a bank whose sole customer is the city of Los Angeles. When we pay our tax dollars, when we pay parking fines, et cetera, that money gets housed in a financial institution. And in addition to that, when the city takes out infrastructure loans, it can get very expensive because over a 30-year term, you're looking at spending our tax dollars 50% above the initial cost.
Right.
And all that's extracted by Wall Street. So this is a public sector bank for the public sector. That's the difference between what we're doing in postal banking, but we're certainly very for postal banking as well. There's many pillars to public banking. Now, why do we need it on the ballot? Well, there's in the charter currently in Los Angeles, there's a specific language that states that the city cannot engage in commercial enterprises. In order to amend the charter, you do need to make a referendum out of that to make that happen. But it's been great that is the case because, frankly, one of the biggest issues of how do we get this to happen is we had to create the consciousness in the public mind, right, of what this is and what the benefits are. After 2008, there were no really revolutionary ideas lying around, so we basically resuscitated the zombie that failed, right? In 2011, when Occupy came to the fore, they were viscerally against the system, the banking system. But one of the biggest critiques about Occupy is, well, what is your specific policy agenda? What exactly?
What's your solution?
Yep, and we believe full-heartedly this is literally what Occupy craved. What they needed is public banking, very specifically.
Yeah.
And this is the resuscitation of that Occupy 2.0. This time with an extremely focused policy agenda.
I know that there's been some talk about statewide public banking in California. That California is literally providing something on the order of $6 to $15 billion a year in profits for the banks in New York, or at least that's a number I've heard. Correct me if I'm wrong, if you know the actual number. Where's that at?
So that has not gone as far as the municipal public banking movement, although we are very for California State Bank as well. From a political perspective, it's a lot bigger of a bite to chew for obvious reasons. It's a lot bigger of an entity, and we have to coordinate across the entire state to make that happen. We're certainly for it. It's already been on the agenda in 2011. It was vetoed by Jerry Brown. This time, we do believe that will end up succeeding as well. But what we're focusing on specifically is bringing that to the municipal level. To us, that's the most important unit, because you're going to have something that's going to reflect the will of a small constituency, so you really have that sensitivity to local needs. Ultimately, the vision is state banks everywhere, city banks everywhere, postal banks everywhere, turning banking from a rapacious system to a public utility.
Like it is in Germany. Sounds like a plan. Phoenix Goodman, publicbankla.com. And hang on just a second here, Phoenix. We're going to get stepped on.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And you can tweet Phoenix at Phoenix_Goodman or Public Bank LA. Phoenix, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Good talking with you. We'll be back. Our book today is From Slave Ship to Supermax, Mass Incarceration, Prisoner Abuse, and the New Neo-Slave Model by Patrick Elliott Alexander. This is Chapter 1. Talking in George Jackson's Shadow is the title, if Beale Street could talk. Prison preoccupied the literary imagination of James Baldwin. Yet his biographer David Leeming is one of the few to notice that prisons and prisoners were a significant part of Baldwin's own personal experience. Even the most cursory glance at Baldwin's published works and interviews bear out Leeming's important observation. In his essay Equal in Paris, 1955, Baldwin reveals that during his time in France, he was, quote, arrested as a receiver of stolen goods and spent 8 days in prison. While confined, Baldwin witnessed with great shock another incarcerated man's bleeding and wounding go unattended intentionally by prison staff. In his longer essay, No Name on the Street, 1972, Baldwin reflects on frequent prison visits that he made to his friend Tony Maynard, a black man who suffered violent treatment from guards after he was falsely accused with the murder of a white U.S. Marine. Baldwin's advocacy for black political prisoners in particular deeply informed his writings and public addresses throughout the 1970s and included actions such as aiding in the release of imprisoned Black Panther Party co-founders Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale. In 1970, Baldwin was so outraged by the appearance of Angela Davis, the black revolutionary and advocate for political prisoners in handcuffs and mock mugshot posture on the cover of Newsweek magazine, that he published an open letter to the New York Review of Books in which he deemed her jailing a continuation of slavery and a foreshadowing of a radicalized epidemic of mass incarceration at one and at the same time. Quote, only a handful of the millions of people in this vast place are unaware that the fate intended for you, Sister Angela, and for the numberless prisoners in our concentration camps, for that is what they are, is a fate which is about to engulf them too, end quote. When Baldwin spoke out about racism in the criminal justice system in the Dick Cavett Show in 1973, he won widespread admiration among imprisoned black communities, receiving, quote, so many letters from them that he determined to arrange a Christmas version of his musical drama, The Hallelujah Chorus, that would tour American prisons. Finally, in 1982, Baldwin published a letter in which he insisted that artists and prisoners have more in common with one another than have servants of the state. Baldwin was a stranger neither to witnessing nor to writing about prisons and prisoner abuse. Yet Baldwin's oeuvre had not been examined extensively in the context of his engagements with the literature and life experiences of imprisoned men and women. This chapter focuses on Baldwin's understanding of prisoner abuse and police intimidation as interrelated, radicalized social control functions of the contemporary U.S. carceral state, and pays careful attention to how his historicizing of radicalized state violence in fiction is shaped by his admiring engagement with the writings of imprisoned intellectuals. Baldwin, I contend, alludes to the human chattel conditioning, disciplinary violence, and economic exploitation that typified the institution of slavery in his Black Liberation Movement era short stories and novels to situate his Black working class characters' subjection to racial profiling, police brutality, wrongful incarceration, indefinite solitary confinement, prisoner abuse, and premature death in racialized historical context. Focusing mostly on Baldwin's novel If Beale Street Could Talk, 1974, this chapter explores how Baldwin, inspired by the narrative techniques of the imprisoned intellectual George Jackson, links a repressive logic of racial terror from the era of antebellum slavery with the state's practice of white supremacist social control into the contemporary criminal justice system. I argue that by incorporating Baldwin's conception of neo-slavery into the elusive framework for Beale Street, Baldwin elucidates the predictability, rather than the aberrant nature, of Black men's hypercriminalization, incarceration, and brutalization by the state. Beale Street thus exemplifies well what I theorized in the introduction as a neo-abolitionist novel. With this work, Baldwin becomes the first canonical African-American writer to construct a conceptual model of the prison-industrial complex in fiction that privileges the narrative viewpoint of its captives while also making apparent slavery's vestiges in the contemporary U.S. criminal justice system. My point of departure for this chapter is Baldwin's career-length consideration of racial terror as a state-sanctioned social control function of both pre- and post-slavery American life, and the relationship of this instrumentalist terror to Blacks' recurring encounters with state violence in the late 20th and 21st centuries. This contextualization establishes a broader framework within which my reading of criminalization and punishment in Beale Street might be understood. Baldwin's witnessing of the physical, psychological, and spiritual harm that the criminalized Black body endures at the hands of the state shows up prominently in his nonfiction works as well. In his book-length essay, No Name in the Street, for instance, Baldwin's assessment of wounds that prison guards inflict on his former driver and bodyguard, Tony Maynard, a wrongfully incarcerated Black man, is characteristically disturbing and damning. The book, From Slave Ship to Supermax.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A few other things in the news here now that we've started out with this here, what billionaires want. And, you know, this, like I said, this has become a crisis for America. And it's not just, oh, yeah, the billionaires are holding on to all this stuff. It is that wealth inequality right now in the United States is worse than it literally has ever been. Even worse than 1929, which brought about the Great Crash. And one of the things that we know about wealth inequality is that it is socially destructive. Kate Pickens and Richard, what's his last name? Anyhow, it'll come to me. Wrote this book called Richard Wilkinson, wrote this book called The Spirit Level, and another book called Why Inequality Matters. They have a whole website on this stuff. And what you find is that the more unequal a society is, the greater the distance between the very rich and the very poor. The more unequal a society is, the more the higher rates you have of of diseases of all kinds, of drug addiction, of alcoholism, of teenage pregnancies, of sexually transmitted diseases, of unwanted pregnancies and abortions as well, of crime, of homicide and suicide. All of these social ills, higher rates of mental illness, higher rates of depression, lower rates of social engagement, lower rates of civic participation, including voting, all of these social ills come out of a small group of people, in this case, literally just a few thousand people in the United States, or a few thousand families in the United States, owning something like 70–80% of the entire wealth of the country. 3 guys owning 50% of the wealth of the entire country. 3 men have accumulated half of this country's wealth, or an amount of wealth equal to that of the bottom half of Americans. Now that's mind-boggling when you think about it, and it's extraordinarily destructive. A few other things in the news that I wanted to talk about. Actually, in the second hour, I'm going to get into this in a lot more detail. Why? It's open right now. It's Medicare open enrollment season, and a great piece over at Alternet from the Independent Media Institute by Diane Archer about why Medicare Advantage is a scam and why it's damaging Medicare, and it is not a good choice. It's dangerous for people. We'll get into that in some detail in the next hour. Mike Pence is under fire today because I mean, this just is breathtaking, right? Mike Pence said that he was going to have a minister open a campaign event. He's out there stumping for some Republican who was a rabbi who could, say a prayer for, on behalf of, or whatever, however it was phrased, for these 11 people who were slaughtered in the synagogue, the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh. Now, there's this very small slice of Christianity called Messianic Judaism. And it is people who grew up as Jews, who were born Jews, who continue to maintain a Jewish identity. In this case, this guy calls himself a rabbi. He dresses like a rabbi. He's, the yarmulke and a shawl and the whole bit. But they say that Jesus is the Messiah, and he's already come. Now, every branch of Judaism rejects this. Every branch of Judaism. This is a branch of Christianity. These people are Christians. They believe Jesus is the Messiah. I mean, that's kind of the definition of being a Christian. And so Pence asked this guy, Rabbi Lauren Jacobs, who Pence referred to as a leader in the Jewish community, to do the prayer. And Jacobs prayed in the name of Jesus the Messiah. This is bizarre. I mean, just the bizarre. Anyhow, we've got news about the red tides down in Florida and what that's doing with Rick Scott's race. We'll get to that later on. The unseen driver behind the migrant caravan. It turns out it's climate change. Why the Republicans are lying. Jimmy Carter. There's just a bunch of stuff here that I want to get to as we continue through the day. But let's start out with your calls. Chris in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Chris, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, when we look at Russell Kirk's A Conservative Mind, and we really distill down to, the core philosophy of conservatives and Republicans, could an argument be made that these billionaires, like the Koch brothers and Shelley Adelson et al., these, cabal, that this is an Alex Jones stuff, they're out in the open, that them advocating libertarian economics is not necessarily in bad faith if they philosophically believe that more stable societies are achieved by them ruling everything and all of us being poor. That's not them necessarily not acting in bad faith. That's looking out for what their core philosophy is.
Yeah, I wasn't saying that they were acting in bad faith. They're certainly acting in their own interests. They want to do the things that will make them richer. And I think your point is well taken, Chris. For the people who don't know what we're talking about here, Russell Kirk in 1951 or 52 wrote a book called The Conservative Mind. And this was the book that kicked off the modern day conservative movement in a really, really big way. And it was 51 or 52. I might have said 61 or 62, excuse me. And in The Conservative Mind, and this was the book that got William F. Buckley going. This is the book that got Barry Goldwater going. This is the book that got my dad going. I mean, that he thought was, and it in fact, it opens quoting a British conservative from the late 1700s, talking about, how people who are not wealthy should not be allowed to vote. And, one of the, there's a lot of flowery language in the conservative mind, but, at its core, basically what he was saying was, look out, if this middle class thing that Franklin Roosevelt started back in 1933 with the New Deal, this idea that every person, every family should be able to be sustained by one person, typically the husband, but one person in the family working a 40-hour week and taking a couple of weeks of vacation every year and being able to own a house and being able to buy a car and all these guys, if that middle class grows and becomes the largest part of American society, they're going to start getting uppity. They're going to start demanding things. They're going to start asking for more of our wealth. They're going to start wanting socialism. And we've already seen the first cracks in this with Social Security, the first major socialist program in the United States. Now, that's not my opinion, it was Russell Kirk's. And he doesn't explicitly lay it out, but it's certainly there between the lines in the book that the most stable form of political system is what England had at the time that Charles Dickens was writing. And Charles Dickens knew this very well. His father couldn't pay his debts and he got thrown in debtor's prison. Dickens wrote during a time when England had not minimum wage laws, but maximum wage laws. And it wasn't for the rich. It was maximum wage laws for the working poor so that they wouldn't become the middle class. The middle class was considered a dangerous thing. The British middle class was literally Scrooge and Marley. It was small business people, doctors and lawyers. That was it. That was the British middle class in the 19th century. You had a very small ruling elite that was very wealthy and held all the political power. You had a very small middle class that largely served the ruling elite or provided goods and services to the working poor. And then you had the working poor who could not get out of poverty because of the maximum wage laws. And that's the conservative worldview, that is how you have a stable society. And by the way, we actually know that they're right. That actually does produce a stable society. England didn't have a revolution. We did. And we did in 1776 because a middle class had emerged. People say, oh, Jefferson and Madison and all those guys, they were all the, rich people, insanely rich people. Jefferson died in bankruptcy. George Washington died broke. Madison's wealth did not even sustain his heirs. The wealthiest man who signed the Declaration of Independence was John Hancock. His wealth in today's dollars was $700,000. That's how much he had. These guys were the upper middle class. They had big houses, but land was cheap. I mean, land was functionally free, and it had a lot of wood on it, and that was functionally free. And, exploiting slavery as they did in the southern states, and exploiting immigrant labor, indentured immigrant labor in most cases, as they did in the northern states, because so many people were flooding in North America at the time. There were lots and lots of people who could cut those trees down and provide you with cheap wood to build a house. Housing was cheap. And frankly, those houses weren't all that big. If you look at, the British squires, their houses were much more elegant than Monticello. In fact, the thing that amazed me when I visited Monticello was how small it was, actually. So, it was the middle class that perpetrated the revolution here in the United States. And so, yeah, Russell Kirk was absolutely right. Anyhow, enough of that rant. Maine and Chicago. Hey, Maine, what's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Tom? Yeah, I wanted to make a couple points here. Like we have to have more democracy here in America, and one of it is getting rid of trickle down voodoo Ragoon economics.
Yeah.
And another one is getting rid of that electoral college so that you have one man, one woman, one vote.
Yep.
You know, and then, you know, taxing these billionaires, you know, for democracy's sake is something that should be done. I mean, what are they, all this money that they have is just to die and say, well, look, I had X amount of $1 billion on my bank account?
I think it's a mental illness. You've heard me say this before, Maine, but I think these guys have obsessive compulsive disorder. I think that they, you know, like people who can't stop washing their hands. They're hoarders. If they had not been, if their daddy had not been a multimillionaire, if the Koch brothers' daddies hadn't been multimillionaires, they'd probably be living in a cheap apartment in New York City with newspapers stacked to the ceiling and empty tin cans and orange juice cartons all over the place because they are hoarders.
Right. And we have to go with them with issues. You know, we have to go, as in the boxing term, toe-to-toe. You know, they talk about if they go low, we go high. No, we have to go toe-to-toe with them. And we have to go with issues such as free education, free health care, pay student. These are the issues that we have to fight them with. Stop privatization. Make non-profit.
Yes.
Make things, the commons non-profit.
Right. Yeah, make our hospitals non-profit again, you know, all that kind of stuff.
And the schools and all that. For democracy's sake, for democracy.
I am with you, Maine. I am with you. You are singing my song. Maine, thanks so much for the call. Always great to hear from you. We'll be right back with more of the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Taking back America's media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, doing our little part here. Thom Hartmann with you. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Lee in San Bernardino, listening on KPFK. Hey, Lee, what's up?
What's up, man? Tom, how you doing today? I just want to let you know, man, it smells of global white supremacy, man.
Yeah.
And what it is these guys, since they were kids, they've had land, their dads had land, their grandpas had land, and it's just passed on from generation to generation. They don't have to work. They don't have to get out here and see what it's really like, you know. And man, I'm so glad you're here. You're the type of station that we really need around, man. You're a good dude, and these guys are lucky. Silver spoon, gold spoon. They were born with it in their mouth.
Yep.
You know, we even got guys now, man. I'm not on a job where the higher ups are crooked. You can't even go to corporate because corporate is crooked. So it's like all through this world, all the entities are crooked. And I got one last thing to say. John Clark Anderson, that should be our president. Everybody should look him up. John Clark Anderson. Claude Anderson.
You're not talking about the John Anderson who 30 years ago ran as an independent for president. This is some other John Anderson.
He wrote the book, Black Labor, White Wealth. That should be our president.
Okay. I'll have to check that out, Lee. I'm not familiar with that.
Check that out for me, please, man. And everybody that heard, check that book out and check that individual. He's a good man.
Okay, I will. Thank you, Lee. Thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for listening to KPFK. Jay in Greensboro, North Carolina, watching on YouTube. Hey, Jay, what's up? What's up? Excuse me.
Hey,
what's up?
It's good to talk to you. Can you hear me okay?
Just fine, yeah.
Yeah. Earlier you were talking about income inequality.
Yeah.
You know something else that goes along with income inequality? 3 words. Student loan default.
Yeah. We are by the way, we are the only developed country in the world where when you graduate from college, you can be in debt. Yeah, other countries, I mean, in most Northern European countries, they actually pay students to go to school.
Denmark, the Danes have it so good.
$200 a month in Denmark to go to college. Plus, they pay for your books.
Now, let me spiel on this real quick because this needs to be talked about.
You got a minute?
I am one of those many students who probably will be defaulting in a student loan because I work at a job where I got a restaurant raise only 25 cents. I listen to heavy stuff all night. And the thing is, they want me to pay, what, $200 a month? I'm trying to get an apartment. I don't have that kind of money. I don't. So if I got to go to default, I go to default to rehabilitate my loan. It's sad to say, but economic traits in this country are just that dire.
Yeah. And this is the problem with that 2005 bankruptcy bill. And this is and I think, frankly, everybody says, you know, Joe Biden's political fortunes will be hurt by the Anita Hill hearings, which, you know, he did not comport himself well, but he was also the author of the bankruptcy bill that made it illegal for you to default on a student loan and call it bankruptcy. And I think that's going to hurt him more than anything else. I really do. But we'll see. Jay, you're absolutely right. And this is now over $1 trillion. I think it's up to 1.2, maybe 1.3 or 4 trillion dollars in student loan debt here in the United States, from literally virtually nothing. I mean, you know, a few $1 million in student debt back in the 80s when Reagan came into power. This is what 40 years of Reaganism has brought us. We'll be right back. It is 52 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Jim in Carson, California, listening on KPFK. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Good morning, Tom. Pleasure talking to you. I agree, but with one caveat, one condition. The money needs to go to learning a life-sustaining, ecologically sustaining, sustainable lifestyle. Otherwise, it makes no sense. The money goes into throwing more plastics into the ocean, more plastic, more dirt into the water, dirtying up the air, the food, the soil, everything else, transportation, the businesses, everything needs to be redesigned. We are not living in a way that will sustain our planet. We have 10 years. The IPCC came out just recently. Have been coming out for the last 50 years. And that's the bulk. All of the scientists. Are you going to argue with Nobel Prize winners? It's impossible. We have to change. We have 10 years to change. So that money needs to go and start with the willing. Don't start with the general population. There are farmers that want to go into regenerative farming. Let them do it. Help them to do it. There are people that want to make new businesses in sustainable fashions. Co-ops, banks, unions, credit unions. Help them do that. Then we start from there and use that money. Otherwise, we'll buy bigger cars, make bigger cities, and we keep in the same unsustainable way of going.
I agree with you on all points, Jim. The one thing that I would add, the codicil or caveat that I would add to that or put on that is that this has to be done at the level of public policy. If you ask the majority of Americans, and Jim, thank you for the call, you know, very well said. If you ask the majority of Americans if they agree with what Jim just said, that just very, very clear and well articulated list, yes, the majority of Americans will say, yeah, those are all things, these are our values. But if you look at what gets put into legislation, none of it's happening. Except, you know, in a few obscure places here and there, or, you know, in some places in California. But, you know, but everybody agrees with us. Now, why is that? That's because, as I was talking about at the very beginning of this hour, in 1976 and 1978, the United States Supreme Court, for the first time in the history of the United States, said that for rich people to give money to politicians, to buy politicians, and thus to buy public policy, thus to buy legislation, was protected by the First Amendment of the United States as free speech. And then the same thing for corporations. Corporations don't have mouths, but they have to have free speech rights. They're persons, so money is the way that they speak, according to the Supreme Court. That was the First National Bank versus Bellotti decision in 1978 that was authored by Lewis Powell. The guy who authored the Powell Memo in 1971 saying, here's how rich people, corporations, here's how we rise up and take over the country. Well, they rose up and took over the country, and Donald Trump is the logical extension point of all that. And if we're, you know, and it's not enough to say, oh, you know, these rich people, this is so destructive. They all should do like Bill Gates has done and give half his money to a foundation and start, you know, funding things and, you know, starting charter schools and things. No, these should be government functions. We should be taxing these people. I mean, it's just very straightforward. And the government should be responsive to we, the people, not the people who own them. We need to reverse the Buckley decision, the Bellotti decision, and the Citizens United decision. George in Altoona, Pennsylvania. Hey, George, what's up?
Good morning, Tom. What you were talking about earlier about the financial expansion of the Walton family.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out, it's along with the tax laws, it's also for the fact that they expanded their enterprise. Back in the 80s, I used to live up in the New England area, and there was one Walmart just outside of Hartford, Connecticut, and I wouldn't see another one for...
No, I get what you're saying, George, but when I said they made their money on their investments, the Walton family is not running Walmart. They own a massive amount of Walmart stock, and as Walmart got bigger and wealthier, they got bigger and wealthier too. Same with the Mars family, same with the Koch family. They all inherited massive amounts of stock or majority ownership in these companies, but they're not running the company. Now, the Koch brothers is the exception. They're actually running Koch Industries, but the Mars family and the Walton family, they're not running them. They're passive investors, and they've gone from being worth $1 billion to being worth $100 billion. That was my point.
They're profiting from their fathers.
Well, and they're profiting from the way that the system has been rigged by legislation that was written on behalf of people like them because they bought the legislators for it. Your point's well taken, George. Thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. In the next hour, the full next hour, Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, is going to be taking your calls for the hour. So stick around. It is coming up on 58 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Seize the Time, the story of the Black Panther Party and Huey P. Newton by Bobby Seale. This is from page 85, a subchapter titled Huey Backs the Pigs Down. And there are a few words in here that I'll be filling in, as it were. They're walking, he says, one day as we were walking out of the office, I guess we'd been there about a month or so, a pig passed by. He saw us coming out of the office with shotguns and pistols on our sides. About 6 or 7 of us came out of the office there in the daytime, and we looked at the pig as he passed by, and he jumped on his radio because he saw us coming out of the office with these pieces and stuff. We had just finished field stripping weapons, learning about 00 buckshot, learning about the 9mm and the .45, and having a political education session. We had a .45 and a .357 Magnum in the group and a couple of M1s. We had 3 or 4 shotguns by then. We bought up guns like a son of a bitch then. The pig went down 2 blocks and turned around, came back up the other side of the street. They were building rapid transit, BART, right down from Grove Street there, and we went up the other side of the boulevard and came back. We readily assessed that the pigs were ready to see what the F was happening, that this pig had radioed in, and he was running it down, how he had, quote, seen some N-words come out of a place here with some guns and blop, blop, de bloop, etc., come out of this office with guns and stuff. He was radioing into other pigs to help get him. Huey had his father's car that day, and he goes through that whole thing. So anyhow, the police pull him over, and Huey got in the car, and the pig came up to the window. You have any driver's license? So Huey rolled the window down. That wasn't more than a 3 or 4 inch crack in the window. Huey handed his license out the window. Is this your true name, the pig said? And Huey said, yes, that's my true name, Huey P. Newton. Is this your true address, 841 47th Street? And Huey said, yep, that's my true address, 841 47th Street. And what are you doing with the guns? And Huey said, what are you doing with your gun? This particular pig decided he wasn't going to argue, so he went back and got his little writing pad there where they fill out S-word. Your true name is Huey P. Newton? Huey said, that's right. The pig wrote it down. Your true address is 841 47th Street? Huey said, that's right. The pig then looked at his license. What's your phone number? And Huey said, 5, and stopped and wouldn't say anything else. And the pig said, 5 what? And this is when all the S-word between the pig and the party and the pigs began. Huey said, the Fifth Amendment. You ever heard of it? Don't you know about the constitutional right of a person not to testify against himself? 5, I don't have to give you anything but my identification, name, and address, so therefore I don't even want to talk to you. You can leave my car and leave me alone. I don't even want to hear you. What do you mean, the pig said. And Huey said, just what I said. The constitutional right of any man is that he doesn't have to testify against himself. And Huey had a big M1 sitting to his right with his hand on it. I had this 9mm sitting beside me, and Huey had this M1 at his side. Huey was driving. 4 other brothers were in the back seat. One of them was Bobby Hutton. They were being quiet because Huey told them to be quiet, and the pig is going crazy. He's by himself, and Huey's got all these black N-words in the car going for the MFer. Meanwhile, while the pig is trying to get bad, 3 cars drove up behind us and 1 in the front. Some more were in the driveway. Blop, 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 de blue. Then another car came in front of us. A pig jumped out of the car, walked up to our car, and said through the crack in the window with a hoggish voice trying to sound intimidating, what's going on here? And Huey said, the same basic procedures that are supposed to go on. Huey rolled the window down another 5 or 6 inches. The pigs were looking at the guns in the car. Can I see that pistol there? One of the pigs said. No, you can't see it, Huey told him. I was beginning to get skeptical about what was happening because he pointed to my 9mm pistol. Huey was on probation, and if they thought that this was Huey's pistol, I didn't know this law stuff the way Huey knew it, so I moved the pistol over beside me real close. It had been lying in the middle of the seat. I said, no, you can't see it. Huey said, no, you can't see the pistol, nor this, pointing to his rifle. And you don't want to look, and I don't want you to look at it. You don't have to look at it. Is that your pistol? He asked Huey. And I said, no, it's not his pistol, it's my pistol. I said that because I was thinking the man's going to jump on Huey because he already told me about the probation law. If he gets caught with a pistol, he's burned. But if he gets caught with a rifle, the man can't mess with him because his probation officer told him he can carry a rifle or shotgun and he couldn't stop him. The pig said, can I see it or not? So Huey said to me, I'll talk. And then he said to the pig, no, you can't see the pistol. Get away from the car. We don't want you around the car, and that's all there is to it. Well, I can ask him if I can see his pistol or not, the pig says. So I says, well, you can't see my pistol. The MFers tried to get indignant. They were blabbing and oinking to each other about who in the hell we thought we were, and Constitution my ass, they're just turning it around. Then the pig said to Huey, who the hell do you think you are? Look, damn it, Huey said. He opened the car door. This is where Huey got mad. I mean, you have to imagine this N-word. He got mad because these dogs were going to carry on and they were bracing up like they were bad. Huey didn't go for this at all. Huey got very mad. He opened up the door saying, who the hell do you think you are? In the first place, this man, pointing at the pig, came up here and asked me for my license like he was citing me for a ticket or observation of some kind. This police officer is supposed to be carrying out his duty, and here you come talking about our guns? Huey put his hand around his M1 rifle and continued, we have a constitutional right to carry the guns, and anyway, I don't want to hear it. The pigs backed up a couple of steps, and Huey was coming out of the car. Huey had his hand back in the car getting his M1, and you know, if you've ever seen Huey, he gets growly but articulate. He came out of the car with his M1. Huey knows this law so well that he wouldn't have had the one M1 loaded inside the car. So he came out of the car, he dropped around into the chamber right away. Clack, clop. Who do you think you all are anyway? Huey said to the pigs. And the pigs were all on the sidewalk harassing all the brothers and sisters who gathered around. You move on down the street, said the pig. Huey started interrupting. You don't have to move down the street. Don't go anywhere. These pigs can't keep you from observing. You have a right to observe an officer carrying out his duty. And these pigs, they listen to all this S-word, and it goes on from there. It's a great story. Seize the Time by Bobby Seale. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, people who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the second hour of our program. Congressman Mark Pocan is on the line with us. It's our Middays with Mark Wednesday edition. Today, just 6 days out from the election, you can Congressman Pocan is the co-chair, of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the state of Wisconsin, the 2nd District. He's also his website is pocan.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. Congressman, welcome back.
Oh, thanks, Tom. Glad to be here.
So what's your sense of the state of politics and the state of the election right now, 6 days out?
Yeah, everything is weighing on a couple things. People getting out early voting where they can early vote, mobilizing for getting out the vote next Tuesday, November 6th. And if we have the turnout, we can win an awful lot of races, from state legislative races to Senate races. We can pick up the House representatives, and there's also 10 governorships we can flip, which would be crucially important, including in my home state of Wisconsin. So pretty much everything is on whatever people can do to get out the vote in the next 6 days. And I started out this morning in Dodgeville, Wisconsin, in Iowa County, with our gubernatorial candidate, Tony Evers, Lieutenant Governor candidate Mandela Barnes, Sarah Godlewski is running for state treasurer, and they're starting a bus tour. We're doing work with Tammy Baldwin. We're doing work with Randy Bryce, but in Wisconsin to win the 1st congressional district. But all across the country, we're seeing this, and the good news is we're seeing early voting way up, and that's a good sign, I think, for us. And we just got to keep the pedal to the metal until the last hour of voting on November 6th.
Now, I'd like to ask you the question that I have a running bet with Louise every time on MSNBC or CNN they're interviewing a politician or a pundit who is talking about the elections. The question that, my bet is they will never ask this question. And she's actually not betting that they will. It's just, kind of between us. Will they? Will they? Here's the question. What role do you think, or what factor do you think will be played in the election in Wisconsin, in your home state, by voter suppression, by this massive election fraud that the Republicans have been committing since the 1980s?
Well, we had a University of Wisconsin report on the last one, and I think, and I could get the numbers off a little bit, this is from memory, but I think what they said, they thought 150,000 people, was it, or 44,000 specifically due to a photo ID requirement they think couldn't vote. So Scott Walker put in a strict photo ID requirement, which we've never had in Wisconsin. We've always had the 3rd highest turnout between us and Minnesota and Maine, always had the highest turnouts. Oregon's getting up there pretty quick right now. But because of what happened, it was 44,000 specifically to photo ID requirements they think weren't allowed to vote. And don't forget, Donald Trump won the state by 23,000. So that's been in place. We know there'll be probably plenty of other efforts. We've got a lot of people ready to do election protection on Election Day, but it's absolutely a factor. And it may not be what they're doing in Georgia or North Dakota or a lot of other spots that have been very high profile, but we'll have it nonetheless.
Okay. Well, let's pick up some phone calls here. You're with us for the hour taking calls, so let's do it. Chris in Plainfield, Illinois. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call, Congressman and Mr. Hartmann. I just wanted to point out some insight. I think that the essence of the Republican Party and the essence of fascism is both hate, and that one of the only ways to drive out hate is through the antithesis of hate, which is love. And I wanted to ask Congressman what he would plan to do in order to purvey that image and see if he had any ideas on the situation.
Yeah, Chris, thanks for the question. I think one of the things that we've been trying to do, and by we I'm talking about the Democrats in general in most districts, are talking about, what we want to do, which is for the people in the country, right? Things like health care. Without question, the number one issue of this election cycle has been health care. We're watching Republicans, after voting time after time after time to take away and risk your protection for pre-existing conditions through all the votes they did in Congress and through lawsuits that, states like Wisconsin are a part of. And yet now they all want to say they're for pre-existing conditions. So I think, doing what really benefits people that they need health care, your family, the things you worry about are whether or not you can afford your mortgage or rent, whether or not you have health care for your family. I mean, basic core issues like that we have to address. So I think the more we take on those issues, and that helps Democrats, that helps Republicans, that helps independents. It's not like Donald Trump just trying to keep the base motivated with hate and divisiveness. We want to actually do things that benefit everyone, and that's what we're trying to campaign on, and I think that's the single best way to convey what you're saying, Chris. Let's not make it about fear and hate. Let's make it about hope and aspirational ideas, and I think healthcare, education, good-paying jobs, and getting rid of the corruption in Washington are definitely at the very top of the list.
Linda in Deerfield Beach, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Thank you, Congressman, for taking my call.
Sure.
My question to you is, and I already voted by absentee, I see November 6th is recount hell. I think a lot of states, ours being one of them, they're going to pull some shenanigans. But my question to you is, and I wish you would tell everybody out there, even Tom has conservative listeners, if we don't win the House and the Senate, how bad it's going to get. That's all I'm asking you, to put it out there so they know what they're voting for. Thank you, Congressman, for your time.
Linda, thank you so much for asking. So, there's a couple fronts that I'm most nervous about. One is health care. We know that they have done everything they can to try to take apart the Affordable Care Act. They'll figure out a way to completely dismantle it. And if we lose that, that means we lose coverage for pre-existing conditions, because they can jack the rates up to the point you won't be able to afford it, so you won't have coverage if you have a pre-existing condition. They will go after Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. They've already said that. Right after their tax bill, Paul Ryan said it. A couple of weeks ago, Mitch McConnell said it. Oh, my God, we have to go after entitlements. Don't forget, entitlements is their code for, it's not even a code, it's their expression for Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, which, by the way, you've paid for your entire life through your paychecks on Social Security and Medicare. So they will go after that. Paul Ryan has always wanted to privatize Social Security, put it in the hands of Wall Street, let them have some gambling fun, see how they do, and Medicare, put it into a voucher. And then you're going to lose even more access for people who have health care through Medicare. I mean, those are a couple issues. And then I'd also look at war and peace issues. Watching this president and how he handled the situation in Turkey with the Saudi Arabian government, when Saudi Arabia is involved in one of the biggest humanitarian crises in the world in Yemen, watching them not stand up to it, watching them talk tough to Iran but then cozy up to North Korea. I mean, there is a lot to worry about that, along with trade and so many other things. A lot is on the line with November 6th, but I think the last thing I would add, and Joe Biden said this far more eloquently than I'm going to yesterday when he was in Wisconsin, everyone knows Donald Trump. The question is, do we know who we are? We have to express who we are as an American people. So Donald Trump may be a lot of things that many of us are not very happy with, but and for very, very good reason, who are we, the American people? And we have a way to express that on November 6th. And if you're not happy with the divisiveness that comes out every single day that the president seems to truly enjoy putting out there, your opportunity to take care of that is on November 6th.
Rich in Aurora, Colorado. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you, Tom and Congressman Mark, for everything that you do to advance the progressive cause.
Thank you.
You're an inspiration for me. I've been out since September 1st working with the Democratic Party here in Arapahoe County, and prospects look pretty good. I just wanted to ask Congressman Mark what the prospects look like in Wisconsin. Are we going to win back some of the districts there? Thank you.
Sure, Rich, thank you for your question. Wisconsin is one of those 10 states that we can flip a governorship. And it's really important for us to be able to do that. And right now, it's a very, very close race. Tony Evers and Mandela Barnes are our ticket for governor and lieutenant governor. There'll be great people. Tony Evers is the state superintendent of schools. Mandela Barnes used to be a state legislator and most recently worked for SIX, the progressive group that works with state legislators around the country. So he's got great ideas to take our state forward. So we feel good about that. We have an attorney general race. Josh Kahl is running, very, very important. A state treasurer's race, secretary of state. Congressional races, we have 2 seats that are in the red to blue category. That means, according to the Democrat Congressional Campaign Committee, they could flip. One when I've spent an awful lot of time in, it's my home district where I grew up, in Wisconsin's first Paul Ryan's district, where Randy Bryce, Iron Stash, is running. We had 50 people on a bus from Madison Saturday, went down to help do doors in Janesville. That's a race that we can still pick up. And then we think we can flip the state Senate as well. So we could win the governorship and the state Senate. We need 2 seats to do that, and pick up some seats in the state assembly. If we have that, you can see some serious reforms in Wisconsin, a state that often led the country in progressive reform.
There you go. That would be spectacular.
Yeah.
Again, though, as you point out, Scott Walker's photo ID knocked 44,000 people, plus I think over 100,000 were taken off the voting rolls, were purged. Yeah. It's just in Wisconsin. Anyhow, Congressman Mark Pocan is with us taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan, and his website is pocan.house.gov, P-O-C-A-N. We'll be right back. And welcome back. And Ed, listening on Resistance Radio in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Ed, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning. Good morning to both of you. Thank you for what you do, Mark. I'm one of your constituents. I was in that crowd yesterday at the University of Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. It's easy to look beyond the next election, assuming that we win. But regardless of how the income how the outcome is going to be, what is being done to maintain the momentum that we have now for the next 2 years off election?
Great question, Ed, and thanks for being there yesterday. Tom, we had a big rally on the UW-Madison campus with Joe Biden, Tammy Baldwin, our state candidates, and it was a great attended rally. We've got voter turnout up on campus. And Ed, specifically to your question, interesting, I ran into someone who used to be a chief of staff for a former member of Congress yesterday, who's been keeping track of everyone who's been to the 4 first states that have caucuses or primaries. And he's kept a list of who's gone to all 4 states who have an organization and have like a consultant hired while they're doing campaigning. And he's got a list of 42 people that have done that. That means there's at least 42 people right now who would like to be president of the United States. So
this is on both parties?
No, on the Democratic side.
Just on the Democratic side?
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. 42 people that have been to all 4 states and met the other criteria he had. So given that, that tells me, we're going to have a lot of people vying for that there's good and bad. Good, they're out working really hard. Bad, sometimes they all try to one-up each other, and that could be interesting. But I think for the rest of us is to make sure that we're putting out the issues that they can win on. So, as the co-chair of the Progressive Caucus, we just built this new 501c3 entity that's going to really work with our outside progressive partners to put progressive ideas out there. We're hoping that those will be the ideas that lead candidates. If you want to be president, you better be responding to the issues like Medicare for all and debt-free college and a lot of the other things that we're putting out. So I think our job now is just to keep those issues to the forefront. There's going to be a lot of people potentially running, but if they're running, they better talk about what we talk about as real people. And as you know, most of the progressive issues are supported by a majority of the public. Let's make sure that they're listening to the people.
Congressman, we just have 50 seconds until the break, so I'll toss out a quick question.
Yeah.
You and Raul Grijalva are the leaders of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Ro Khanna, the vice chair. Are any of you guys facing serious challenges? And you're all up for a re-election. This is the House of Representatives. And if not, are there any other people in that we would consider kind of the leadership of the Democratic Party who, or the progressive movement in particular, who are facing a substantial challenge in their district that we probably should be thinking about helping out in one way or another, you know, phone banking for them or something?
Yeah, and I want to make sure you have Pramila Jayapal on that list because she's our first vice chair, and she's been an awesome partner in our leadership team as well.
Thank you.
No one is in a close district in our leadership, but we have a lot of races that we're watching. You know, Kara Eastman in Omaha, Nebraska is one that I've been very impressed. They've run a really great grassroots campaign. They just got upgraded to a toss-up by Nate Silver. You know, there's races like that if we can win, if progressives win in Omaha, that sends a message nationally. So people need to keep focused on all of those type of races. It's really important for us.
Amen. Congressman Mark Pocan with us, taking your calls for the hour. Middays with Mark. We'll be back in just a moment with more of your calls for the Congressman right after this. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising. And you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. People who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thank you. Welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Albert in Marina Del Rey, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Tom. Hey, Congressman. Thanks for taking my call. I have a couple suggestions about millennial voting habits, as I'm a millennial, and I'm not really sure how many people are going to call in today that are of the same age bracket. And I hope you give me a little time to express these suggestions to get us out to vote. Last Wednesday, I gave you a call and asked you specifically, you know, who the Progressive Party was going to put up for speakership. As a young person, and knowing that the Progressive Party is the largest.
You mean the Progressive Caucus, Albert?
Progressive Caucus, I'm sorry, is the largest faction within the Democratic Party, and we don't see our leaders in those positions of powers. That depresses the vote, suppresses our vote. We don't want to, but we're going to go third party. We're giving you all we got. You know what I'm saying? Some of us, and you know, we can't even run for president because we're not 35. We can't run for Senate because we're not 30. Most of us aren't even in that age bracket. We don't want to hear about Joe Biden. And so what I'm trying to tell you is we need to see you guys in positions of leadership, not just, you know, we're putting out this or we're putting out that. You know, we need to see you in the leadership. I would like to be speaker if you don't, because we can control the narrative. We don't want people who are going to run on the ideas that we put out there. We want the person who puts out the idea to run, and we want that person to be progressive. So I would like to be speaker. If you don't want to put up somebody, I'll be glad to give you my name, but we need to be able to control the narrative, and that's not what we're doing by not having leadership positions.
Got it, Albert. That's a great one. Congressman?
Yeah. So, Albert, I've got some good news. So far, some of the people that are running from leadership from our caucus, and quite honestly from our caucus's leadership team, not even just from the caucus itself, Barbara Lee is running for caucus chair. We have David Cicilline running for assistant majority leader. We have Catherine Clark running for the vice caucus chair.
Are you talking not the Progressive Caucus? You're talking the entire Democratic
Caucus? The entire
caucus.
Yeah, the Democratic Caucus, correct. Right. We have Jamie Raskin talking about running for a newly created leadership position for someone who's in their first 3 terms. We have a lot of other folks. We have 13 people that will be committee chairs, including people like Jerry Nadler, who's going to be in charge of the Judiciary Committee, that will be on TV a whole bunch because they'll be doing a lot of the hearings. So the good news is, Albert, we will have progressives in key positions of power that will absolutely be making the news, even though corporate media is still difficult at times, but they're going to be in positions that they can't be ignored. And also, Albert, I got to tell you, I agree with you on the issues that move millennials on campus. Yesterday, I think something that surprised a lot of people. I went through a few issues, and we had a chant back from people to see, intensity and, let them know to get out. It was an early vote rally. When I talked about legalizing cannabis, you should have saw the extra response that we got. And in Wisconsin and a lot of places on the ballot in a lot of counties in Wisconsin is legalizing cannabis or medical marijuana. And we need to make sure we're talking about a lot of different issues. But that's one that, I think a lot of politicians often don't want to talk about unless they're from a state with it. And yet, I'll tell you, it's what real people do talk about. They're tired of people being incarcerated for it. So I think we are trying to make sure that we're listening to the millennials and talking about issues that are important in addition to those folks that are going to be part of our leadership.
Great. 1 minute to the break. Sharon, you got a quick question for Congressman Pocan from Madison, Illinois?
Yes, I do. So my question is, Trump has been pretty much been using his bully pulpit from the day he got elected and has been getting his message out there to keep his momentum going. How are we as Democrats combating this? I remember with President Obama, they spoke about the Ebola, and they played that drum until it drowned out everything else that was going on. And they keep doing this with a lot of other issues. So how are we as Democrats fighting back to get our message out there and drown their messages out, which basically is nothing? But somehow
Sharon,
they get to keep it in
the good news and the bad news of it. I'll give you the bad news first. It's always tough. Whoever the president is going to get 1,000 times more coverage or at least 100 times more coverage than any individual Democrat because we don't have a single person that's the chair, of Democrats. But the good news is we're all in unison on talking about health care and good-paying jobs and dealing with the corruption in Washington enough that is being the national narrative. And I think that's positive because I haven't seen that in the previous past elections.
Yeah, it seems to me that all the Democrats are singing from the same hymnal, and that's a good thing. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour here on Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
His website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan, REPMARK, and we'll be right back with more of your calls for him. Today we're reading from Standoff, How America Became Ungovernable by Bill Schneider. This is from the first chapter, titled Old America versus New America. On November 8th, 2016, American voters did an astonishing thing. They elected a president of the United States who most voters, 61%, did not think was qualified to serve as president. How did that happen? How did we get from John F. Kennedy to Donald J. Trump? A little more than 50 years ago, the United States started on a great political journey in two opposite directions, part of the country to the right and part of the country to the left. This is the story of where we are now and how we got here. It's the story of the country's journey and my own personal journey as I covered it. It's the story of two political movements that first emerged in the 1960s. The New America is the progressive coalition of groups whose political consciousness was stirred in that decade. African Americans, young people, working people, gays, immigrants, educated professionals, and the non-religious. What holds that coalition together is a commitment to diversity and inclusion, and that commitment provoked a fierce backlash in 2016. In fact, a conservative backlash has defied the New America for more than 50 years. The backlash came from the old America, mostly white, mostly male, mostly older, mostly conservative, mostly religious, and mostly non-urban. In 2016, the old America rallied to the theme, Make America Great Again. It was a call to restore the America they feared was being swept away by a tide of political correctness. The two moments collided under President Barack Obama. Within weeks of Obama's inauguration on January 20th, 2009, a right-wing opposition movement broke out in the form of the Tea Party. Republicans rode that anger to power in Congress, gaining control of the House of Representatives in 2010 and the Senate in 2014. Within one day of Trump's inauguration, a backlash broke out on the left with a massive spontaneous women's march in Washington that drew throngs of supporters in cities across the United States. Using the Tea Party as a model, Democrats hope to ride anger on the left to power. The right and the left started their journeys at the same place, 38%. That's the vote that Barry Goldwater got in 1964 and that George McGovern got in 1972. The Republican presidential vote peaked with Richard Nixon in 72 at 61% and Ronald Reagan in 84 at 59%. The Democratic presidential vote rose to a bare majority with Jimmy Carter in 76, 50.1%, and then took 32 years to reach a majority again, whereupon the new backlash quickly set in on the right. As of 2017, the Democratic Party had less clout in national and state governments than at any time since 1928. Things started out pretty bad for Democrats. In 1972, a Democratic operative recounted the story of how George McGovern's campaign manager had called the Democratic congressional candidate in Ohio. "I have wonderful news for you," the campaign manager said. "Senator McGovern is coming to campaign in your district." "That is good news," the local candidate responded, "but I'm afraid I'm going to be in Florida visiting my mother." "Wait a minute," McGovern's campaign manager said. "I haven't told you when he's coming." "It doesn't matter," the Democratic candidate replied. "Whenever he shows up, I'll be in Florida visiting my mother." Democrats were forced to accommodate to the new conservative ascendancy. Bill Clinton, who fashioned himself a new Democrat and a proponent of the third way, got elected in '92 with 43% of the vote. The presidential vote was split three ways that year, with independent Ross Perot receiving 19%. Clinton's coattails were unimpressive. Democrats lost seats in the House of Representatives in '92. It was the first election following a census and redistricting. Redistricting always puts incumbents, mostly Democrats in '92, at a disadvantage because they're forced to compete in an unfamiliar electorate. The contours of Clinton's '92 victory were different from anything Democrats had won with before. Democrats may have nominated two Southern white Baptists for president and vice president in 1992, but the Clinton-Al Gore ticket fared worse in the South. It was the only region in the country where George H.W. Bush led Clinton by 2 points. Among whites born in the South, the base of the pre-1960s Democratic coalition, Bush ran 19 points ahead of Clinton. Clinton's vote, weakest in the South and strongest in the East and West Coast, did not look like the Democratic votes that had elected Franklin Roosevelt and John Kennedy and Jimmy Carter. It resembled the votes the Democrats got when they nominated liberals such as George McGovern in '72 and Michael Dukakis in '88. That's why '92 was a breakthrough for Democrats. It was the first time they won with a vote that looked like the new America, but it was still not a majority. Clinton narrowly missed a majority when he was reelected in 1996 with 49%. Perot was on the ballot again. Al Gore carried the popular vote in 2000, but it was not quite a majority, 48%. John Kerry in 2004, same thing, 48% no victory. The breakthrough finally came in 2008 when Barack Obama won a solid majority, 53%, the highest percentage for a Democratic president since Lyndon Johnson. Even so, you could argue that the 2008 Democratic vote was inflated by the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. What if there'd been no crisis? That's why Obama's re-election in 2012 came as such a shock. Obama was re-elected with a majority, 51%, despite a sluggish economic recovery. The new America came out to protect its president and to prove that its coming to power was not a fluke. However, 2016 was an even bigger shock because Trump's primary and general election victories were unexpected. Standoff, How America Became Ungovernable by Bill Schneider. All aboard! It's a once-in-a-lifetime luxury Alaskan cruise on the Regent Seven Seas Mariner, July 24th, 2019. For more information, Keen Luxury Travel, 800-856-1155. And did I mention we'll be getting active on board with special events with yours truly, me and Louise, as we visit Ketchikan, Juneau, Skagway, Sitka, Hubbard Glacier, and Anchorage.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. It's Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Progressive, it's my day to mumble. The Congressional Progressive Caucus is on the line with us, Congressman. You know, it's good here that you're here to talk, because I'm not doing a very good job of it. Let's pick up these calls. George in Santee, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning, gentlemen. What I have to say is I have a lot of friends. I live down here in Duncan Hunter's district, and we're trying to get a Marcamp and a jar over the top down here, but it's difficult. I have a lot of friends that are working class friends, some of them union, some of them non-union, that I notice is being influenced by right-wing hate radio and a lot of these conservative fake news websites. And this being Halloween, I think the proper cautionary statement I have to them is that when you tune into these hate radio stations and fake news websites, you're dancing with the devil. And if you dance with the devil long enough, before you know it, you're right in step with him. I'd like your response to that.
Yeah, George, I mean, you know, all they have is fear, right? That's all they're putting out there, this caravan. You know, I've said, you know, there is no caravan of transgender Nancy Pelosi supporters at the border, right? I mean, they're combining every little bit of fear they have in the last few days, trying to scare people into somehow caring and not looking at what the president's done around issues like separating families and a tax bill where 83% of the money goes to the top 1% and the big corporations, and all of the attacks on health care. I mean, that's the reality of what Republicans have done in Congress, and now they're trying to run far, far, far away from that and scare people with all these little issues that you and I both know are not very real in the end. And I think we just have to make sure people understand that. Again, I think people do know what Donald Trump is about, many, many people. We need to get those folks out to vote to show who we are as a country, and I think you know, any effort that people could put in, knocking on doors, making phone calls, using their social media, talking to their friends and family about these issues to make sure they early vote, because in many areas you can early vote right now, and you should, and then you can have time to help people get out on Election Day on Tuesday. It's going to really matter. So that's what I'm focused on, because I think the more Democrats, the more independents we get out, and fair-minded Republicans who are not happy with this administration in this Congress, we can have a successful Tuesday, November 6th.
Rob in Chico, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Morning, Congressman. I am far from progressive as you can get, but I am sincerely want to be educated on what the progressives, if the progressives took leadership, what is their position on immigration, and specifically describe what happens when someone crosses the border at the Rio Grande, say, man, woman, and 2 children. What is the process? What would happen to them under progressive leadership?
Sure. So, Rob, first of all, there's a lot of fear out there, right? They want to tell you we want open borders. No one wants open borders. Right now, we're actually violating international law. I've been down to the Hidalgo Bridge, for example, in Texas, where if you come to legally claim asylum, there is international law that there's a process in place that you can claim asylum by going through a process. Doesn't mean you're going to get it, but you have to have access to the process. We currently are often violating that. I think what we would like to do is there is 2 sessions ago when I first came to Congress, there was a bill, not perfect, but a really good place to start, that was a bipartisan compromise that came out of the Senate with almost 70 votes, which is pretty much
It passed the Senate.
It passed the Senate, came out of the Senate.
Republicans and Democrats. Mitch McConnell
did not take it up under John Boehner and Paul Ryan's leadership. And because of that, we've gone nowhere in 6 years. So the problem is Republicans in the House stopped something going forward that would have had 2 things. One, extra protections at the borders. So all of this talk, we don't want a giant wall at the cost of billions and billions, but you can have and should have extra protections at the borders. But also we need to have a pathway to citizenship for the aspiring Americans who currently are here, because you can't neglect that 13 million people who are undocumented currently live here. We've got to figure out how to deal with that. And right now, instead, all we're dealing with is trying to tell you there's 3,500 people in the caravan who might in 6 weeks get to the border. So we're sending troops now again, an election ploy to try to deal with it. The issues they're saying that we want to let people in to give them benefits, all the rest, it's so ridiculous that I'm surprised anyone actually believes it. But Donald Trump has done a great job in lying about this, telling you not to believe the media who are telling you the truth, and instead just listen to Donald Trump because he'll tell you the truth.
People who are not citizens are not eligible, who are not here legally, are not eligible for any of these benefits.
It's so
they
ridiculous.
do pay their taxes, but they don't get any benefits.
But they don't get anything for it, so we get a net gain. But also, Paul Ryan, even yesterday, on a very rare occasion, you get this about, less often, you get about once a year from Paul these days, said the president was wrong on trying to do the birthright citizenship issue because it takes a constitutional change. And again, Donald Trump is lying about that. So let's have a better process for the people who are currently here. Let's protect our borders in a better, smarter way using technologies, but we can look at what they had just 2 sessions ago and work off of that and not have to go for all the fear-mongering that this president and the Republicans in Congress are putting forward.
It sounds to me like what you're suggesting is something very similar to what Reagan did in '86. And the one thing that Reagan, the one change that he made was prior to '86, if employers hired people who were not here legally, the employers themselves got busted. They could go to jail. They had huge fines. And as a result of that, the entire construction industry was well unionized. The meatpacking industry was, paid really good money, was well unionized. Reagan stopped enforcing that law. And no president since Reagan has started it. It's still on the books, but no president has seriously enforced that. And Trump isn't either. Everybody criminalizes the individual people who are, looking for a job, but not the employers who are hiring them. And so the construction industry has lost, it's become deunionized largely because of non-citizen labor. The meatpacking industry, same thing. In fact, they're running ads in newspapers down in Mexico looking for help for the meatpacking industry up in the upper Midwest. Wouldn't an important progressive part of that be to start enforcing those laws, putting white employers in jail instead of, brown workers?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, right now, this allows, not only does it hurt all workers because they're able to treat some workers differently, but also they're taking advantage of people because if you speak out, then you can be deported. So you actually, in some ways, have almost borderline slave-like conditions in places because the workers can't speak out. So again, and that hurts all workers. So there's a lot that we can do and we need to do, but we have actually a pretty good framework. We can go back to just a couple sessions ago, pass in a bipartisan way out of the Senate, and that would be a great start.
Yeah, and I should add, by the way, there's a fair amount of evidence that indicates that the reason Reagan stopped enforcing that law was specifically to destroy the unions in the United States. And sure enough, in multiple industries, that's exactly what happened. Paulette in Allen Park, Michigan, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, hello.
Hi, Paulette.
Hi. I'm a transgender woman. I've spoken to you before, Tom, about a year ago. You might not remember. But I wanted to ask the congressman about this thing that President Trump has been talking about, where they're talking about erasing transgender people's identity. I'm someone that's had surgery, and I'm legally and medically female. I have an F on my gender ID, my gender marker on my ID, on my driver's license. I've had a whole bunch of things changed, but I haven't had my birth certificate changed. Can you tell me, can he do anything in reality to hurt us transgender people? And what can be done to stop him from hurting transgenders?
Yeah, Paulette, thank you for the question. The second part, let me answer first. The way you stop him from, whether it be banning people who are transgender serving us in the military or issues like this, is you get everyone you know out to vote November 6th, so we flip the House of Representatives, and it's going to be a lot harder for him, and try to flip the Senate to get anything done. There's a lot of things he says he can do that he'll very likely be challenged in court because, again, he doesn't actually have the power to do, like we saw with immigration, like we saw with the challenges when he tried to ban transgender Americans from serving in the military. So, I think what he's doing is election time. He's putting up everything that he thinks is fearful for some people that are in his base throwing it against the wall. And unfortunately, all too often, the Republicans have used the transgender community, whether it be the bathroom issue or the religious liberty law and being able to not sell things to certain people, or most recently, what we've heard he may be doing. These are all issues he's doing to try to get his base out, because they're not all that excited about him with family separation and other issues. So, Paulette, be politically active. Get everyone you know to be politically active. And if we can have majorities in the House and the Senate, there's an awful lot we can do to make sure that a lot of these threats he puts out there will never be a reality.
Remarkable, isn't it, how far we've come and how far back we could fall, Congressman?
Oh, it's truly scary. I mean, let me share a story when we come back out of the commercial.
Okay, we'll do that. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us taking your calls. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for him. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Website, pocan.house.gov.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And you can tweet him at Rep Mark Pocan. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Congressman, did you want to tell that story after the next break when our commercial stations rejoin us, so that
sure, let's do that.
There'll be some continuity for people, and the people who are listening right now, just know that you'll get that answer in a few minutes. Keith, or that story, Keith in Landrum, South Carolina. You are on the. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Tom and Congressman. For next Tuesday, I just want to remind everybody that the wasted vote is the one that's not cast. For my question, Tom mentioned this the other day. If by chance it, theoretically or whatever, that Trump got rid of the 14th Amendment, would that also remove corporate citizenship, as in corporations or people, as Mitt Romney claimed?
Keith, first of all, I don't think he's going to be able to do it, because you have to take a constitutional change. And even then, I think he would probably try to surgically address it rather than just get rid of it in its entirety. So while I don't have an exact answer for you, I'm kind of spitballing on this one, and I think that he would definitely not touch that aspect of it.
Yeah, my not quite tongue-in-cheek response, there's only 30 countries in the world that have birthright citizenship. It's what we have, and it's who we are. But there's lots of other ways to organize citizenship that are reasonable and egalitarian. My response was, if they want to tinker with the 14th Amendment, if you want to take out birthright citizenship, then, in exchange for that, put the word natural before the word person in the 14th Amendment, because that use of the word person, no person shall be deprived equal protection under the laws, that literally is the basis of the Supreme Court's assertion that corporations are persons. And so, that could be anyhow, but, that's a swap I'd be willing to make, was what he was referring to in any case. Jacob in Baltimore, Maryland, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, gentlemen. Thanks for taking my call. I want to ask the congressman about, given the new IPCC report that just came out earlier this month, which says that basically we need to have entirely turned the ship around by 2030, just over a decade away. And by 2050, there is no path which they calculated which the entire world is not at net zero emission. So clearly, the U.S. has to be a leader in that. And, what I'm wondering is, I know that the Progressive Caucus has 100% renewable energy as a platform, but what is the actual serious plan for trying to address this? We only have one shot. This is, as I've said on Tom's program before, this is a qualitatively different issue than any other issue that we face. We only get one shot to do it. And, frankly, we need World War II level mobilization and a global green Marshall Plan. And are the Democrats ready and willing to actually, or at least the progressives among them, ready and willing to fight for that?
Okay.
Yeah, so Jacob, this is one where really the people are going to have to lead more and more on this and make the leaders eventually follow. While we are strongly in support of that, we have several caucuses around climate change and safe climate. The real problem is Donald Trump will still be president, and he's the guy who pulled us out of the Paris Climate Agreement. I don't see him suddenly flipping given the people he's put in the EPA and everything else. So we have a fight, and we can try to do things legislatively, but this is going to take the people power grassroots initiatives to really get it done.
Yeah, it's going to be a big lift, and Jacob is so right about the urgency of this. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. We'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. It is coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. People who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Just read a commercial for ExpressVPN.com, one of our new sponsors. I'm so pleased that they are advertising with us. This is since the Republicans have destroyed net neutrality. Anyhow, we're back with Congressman Mark Pocan. Congressman, you wanted to tell us a story before we pick up the next call?
Yeah, if I could. It relates to what Paulette brought, this kind of fear that the Republicans put out there, and what the real impact is. And I think sometimes, you know, people don't understand the real impact. People who don't live and breathe politics, who don't listen to your show, Tom, who don't, follow politics very closely. I was doing doors Saturday with Randy Bryce in the south part of Janesville, in a lower middle-class neighborhood. And I went to one door, and I talked to the woman, and I said, "Are you planning on going on vote a week from Tuesday?" And she said, "If we're still able to live here." So she's worried about being evicted because they're having a hard time paying the rent. I talked to another woman who, it was a lesbian couple, and until I mentioned myself that my husband and I live in the western part of Dane County, and then she opened up a little bit, what she told me was she's afraid because her and her partner, as two women living together on a government list, a voting list, they're afraid that at some point someone may come to get them. And, you know, this is the fear that's put out there when it's the others, right? It's Middle Easterners, it's people across the border, it's the transgender community, it's all the different folks that this guy is so proud to be a nationalist that he sends out there very coded, but all the people that he's willing to attack and throw under the bus, people feel it who don't follow politics, and they're very, very afraid, and we're seeing that out there. And I just wanted to offer that because I love doing doors, because I get the real conversations with people who don't just think about politics at a high level, who are just worried about life. But this is the things that they're actually thinking about. And, we just have to know that it's really even more awful, I think, than some of us sometimes refer to when Donald Trump does this. It has a negative impact on real people's lives.
Are you and your husband concerned about what might happen if the Supreme Court reverses Obergefell?
I mean, a lot of things have happened to a lot of people who've been married. I mean, again, our marriage has done nothing. Donald Trump is on whatever number he's on, number 3, not because my husband and I. It's because he's got the problem, right? And, I think we need to make sure everyone realizes that. But there's a lot of threats to, couples like us, to that couple in Janesville and so many other people. But the fact that she actually was afraid to be on a government list with her partner just really, it just really hit me, because it's like that's what real people are worried about, and that's what the divisiveness that this president's creating, what people are feeling out in America.
Yeah, amen. Steve in St. Genevieve, Missouri. Steve, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Tom. Hey, Congressman. My question is to the Congressman. First, I live in Missouri, and the marijuana Prop C is going to be, I think it's the third time they're going to try to go for it again in this state. You were talking about the banking system earlier, about trying to push the federal banking out and give it more to the state.
In the previous hour, we had a guest talking about public banking. Yeah, continue, Steve.
Oh, okay. Is that going to actually benefit marijuana companies? Because from my understanding right now, you can't deposit any of that profits into a FDIC account.
Right. Congressman, that has to do with marijuana being classified as a Schedule I drug, right? Thank you, Steve.
Right, and I'll tell you, Steve, this is one where I'm really hopeful. There are Republicans who also think this is a crazy notion, and there are moderate and conservative Democrats who think this is a crazy notion that you have a legal business and you can't put money in a bank because of some antiquated interpretation of what marijuana is. I think that's something that we can change. I haven't heard Donald Trump express an opinion one way or the other on it, but I do think it's something that you could actually see some bipartisanship happen. It is an antiquated approach to something that now is a legal business in many states, and I do think we can change that law.
Yeah. Congressman, we have 1 minute and 20 seconds. Not quite enough for a call, but long enough for a good rant to get us ready for the election. Go for it.
Sure. So often people say this is the most important election of our lifetimes. I truly, honestly believe that this is. Donald Trump is something I never, ever expected. I talk to people, and they're like, you couldn't write a novel this bad, and yet this is what we're living through. And if elections have consequences, Wisconsin's one of those states where we had a 250,000 Democratic vote dropout, and he won Wisconsin. We all need to do everything we can in the remaining days to, one, vote early, and two, spend time helping get out voters. It is so very important. I want our conversation next week, Tom, to be talking about all the successes we had and how progressives won in all these interesting parts of the country and these great referendums that passed. It only happens if we participate and vote, and I just really want to encourage everyone to do whatever you can, give a little more in the next week of your time and effort, and we can get this done.
If somebody listening wants to, reach out and do some phone banking from home or something, who do they call? Where do they go? What's the website?
I would say, find a candidate. I'm sure the candidates will do it. Most of the Democratic parties do in states and local communities. You can contact them. Groups like Indivisible and Move On have great efforts. You can probably contact those as well. I don't think there'll be a hard way to find a way to get involved, but
there you go.
Please do that.
Okay, amen. Congressman Mark Pocan, thanks so much for being with us today, Congressman.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom.
Always an honor to host you here on this program. Middays with Mark. You can check out his website at pocan.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep, R-E-P, as in Representative, Mark, M-A-R-K, Pocan, P-O-C-A-N. We'll be back with more of the news of the day. We're going to actually interview an expert on vampires. But Professor Mary Wood is next.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Our book for the book report today is Taking Bullets, Terrorism and Black Life in 21st Century America, Confronting White Nationalism, Supremacy, Privilege, Plutocracy, and Oligarchy, A Poet's Representation and Challenge by Haki R. Madhubuti. He writes, this is from the chapter, page 27, the chapter Terror in the Midst of Prayer and Empire. In our perpetual state of national mourning, where our eyes are watered out and our hearts cease to heal at the rate the Creator meant them to, we hold hands in profound silence as we remember the Mother Emanuel 9 of Charleston, South Carolina, those 9 mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers. Even before burying, before black earth covered their caskets, too many ministers, media pundits, and plain white and black folks downgraded the terror that quickened their deaths of our finest in this land to the mental illness and race hatred, in quotes, of a single young white man. He may have acted alone, but he was not alone in his thinking, encouragement, gathering of arms, warped consciousness, confirmation, or ahistorical views, and yeses from the millions in the nation who proudly wear and display the Confederate flag above their hearts and fly it in all of its traitorous glory over a state capitol and other institutions. Again, we find ourselves at war with history and culture, entertaining another call for a national conversation on race and a president weary of trying to make sense of and comfort the grief-stricken nation with words from the highest office of the land. This was written while Obama was president. These are the facts, not an opinion or the ignorant ranting of compromised preachers and television pundits. A 21-year-old white man, a citizen of South Carolina, walked into the sacred and spiritual home of the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church of Charleston, the historic home of black liberation fighter Denmark Vesey, and fatally killed 9 of its members, including the pastor, during Bible study. This was a pure act of domestic terrorism. A modern-day lynching by a young white nationalist who coolly and calmly assassinated 9 black members of Mother Emanuel. Domestic violence and acts of terrorism are on the rise in the United States, as detailed by Charles Kurzman and Daniel Schanzer in their New York Times op-ed, The Other Threat, where they state that, quote, the main terrorist threat in the United States is not from violent Muslim extremists, but from right-wing extremists, end quote. In their national research, local police agencies across the country identified, quote, the militias, neo-Nazis, and sovereign citizens as the major threat the nation faces in regard to extremism, end quote. All of this is homegrown with international connections. Morris Dees and J. Richard Cohen of the Southern Poverty Law Center also writes in the New York Times article, Racists Without Borders, that, quote, Americans tend to view attacks like the mass murder in Charleston as isolated hate crimes, the work of a deranged racist or a group of zealots lashing out in anger unconnected to a broader movement. This view we can no longer afford to indulge. When, according to survivors, Mr. Roof told the victims at the prayer meeting that black people were, quote, taking over the country, he was expressing sentiments that unite white nationalists from the United States and Canada to Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Unlike those of the Civil Rights era, whose main goal was to maintain Jim Crow in the American South, today's white supremacists don't see borders. They see a white tribe under attack by people of color across the globe. The end of white rule in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and South Africa, they believe, foreshadowed an apocalyptic future for all white people, a white genocide that must be stopped before it's too late. End of quote. The internationalization of terrorism is not a foreign theory in today's social media world. Dees and Cohen will be speaking at a conference in Budapest about this transnational white supremacism that is emerging as the world grows more connected technologically. The message of white genocide is spreading. Also, David J. Whitaker's Terrorism, Understanding the Global Threat, gives another view. Clearly, our rush to forgive this mass murderer within 96 hours of this supreme tragedy is misguided, anti-human, and does not allow for properly grieving the fallen. As perfectly scripted, displaying the permanent effectiveness of Christian acculturation on the Sunday, June 21st, 2015 morning services of Mother Emanuel Church, the black Christians out-Christianed their white brothers and sisters. Before the morning sermon, the presiding elder, Reverend Norvell Goff Sr., found it necessary to thank the local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies for doing their job. He also stated, quote, a lot of folks expected us to do something strange and break out in a riot. Well, they just don't know us. We are people of faith, end quote. I find this statement inappropriate, insensitive, and ahistorical, implying, whether he meant it or not, that the recent uprising and rebellions in Ferguson, New York, Cleveland, and other parts of the nation were riots and did not include black people of faith, and that somehow they were strange in their social, political, and economic activism. Informed people do not riot against injustice or white terrorism. They study, organize, and strategically struggle at all levels, in the streets, on the campus, in front of the White House, and in corporate boardrooms. Dylan Roof stated his stated intentions were to start a race war, and informed black leadership understands that we cannot pray this away or appeal to any law enforcement agency that all across the country, including Charleston, has been seriously compromised. To label black reaction to murder, terrorism, deep unemployment, substandard housing, etc., as riot is to blame the victim. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, you know, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, people who support our program there get, you know, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is Professor Mary Wood. She is the Philip H. Knight Professor of Law and Faculty Director of Environmental and Natural Resources Law at the Law Center, at the University of Oregon School of Law. She's also the author of the book Nature's Trust, Environmental Law for a New Ecological Age. OurChildren'sTrust.org is doing a lawsuit based on Professor Wood's writings and theories, and, well, it's not even a theory, I suppose. In fact, let's just start with Professor Wood. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Whoa. Oh, yeah, that's not working. Somehow, I don't know what we have to do here, but maybe. Yeah. Mute your speakers. Mary needs to mute her speakers. If you can possibly do that, I don't know. Can you speak again, Mary?
Okay.
Oh, this isn't going to work. The problem, I think, is that we're trying to use the Zoom audio. Is it possible for you to pick up a phone? And Shira, can you put her phone on the line here so I can pick her up, and we can do this by telephone? Okay, there we go. Professor Wood, I have you on the phone. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Just fine. Yeah, talk to me on the phone, and we'll do it that way.
Perfect.
Okay, if you can turn that up, Sean, crank up the volume on the phone. Professor Wood, you there?
I'm here.
Okay. The closer you get your mouth to the phone, the better, because your phone is awful faint. So if you could start out by telling us, number one, how's the OurChildren'sTrust.org lawsuit going? And number two, what is the legal theory that drives it?
Yes, well, the lawsuit has been 3 years in the making, and it was about to go to trial this last Monday, October 29th. And on the sort of at the midnight hour, the Department of Justice, representing the Trump administration, had filed an extraordinary petition for what's called writ of mandamus to the U.S. Supreme Court. And Justice Roberts put a temporary stay on the case to consider Department of Justice's arguments. And so October 29th, the kids were supposed to be in the courtroom here in the Federal District Court of Eugene for what's called the trial of the century, because it would be the first time that fossil fuel policy would actually meet climate science in court. That didn't happen, but there were rallies in support of the trial across the country, and now everybody's literally just waiting in suspense. The theories behind this very simply. The youth are suing the Trump administration for its fossil fuel policy that is driving us towards climate collapse and an inhabitable country. And it's based on two premises. One, that there is a affirmative constitutional due process right to prevent the government from putting its citizens in such peril, affirmative peril, by approving drilling every day and coal mining and subsidizing fossil fuels. The second principle is based on the public trust, which is an old principle that has been in our country since the very beginning, and it's a very simple concept that government, as part of its function, has to hold natural resources that we survive on in trust for the people, for present and future generations. And as trustee, it just has to protect these resources so that they can continue supporting our survival and promote the endurance of our nation. So those are the two bases.
So I'd like to kind of open those up and look into them. Where in law or in the Constitution do you find the affirmative right not to be harmed by your government, essentially, or not for your government not to collaborate with industry or even allow industry to harm us?
Yeah, so the due process clause is in our Constitution, and most Americans know what that means, that government can't deprive us of due process, or of key rights without due process of law, so life, liberty, property. And there's case law that says when the government doesn't have a general duty to ensure our protection every day, it does have the duty not to take affirmative action that just puts citizens in peril. And so under that case law, the plaintiffs have constructed a very robust argument going back decades, looking at government documents that show, and these are all available to the public, that show that the government knew about this climate threat for decades and deliberately pursued a fossil fuel policy despite knowing about this threat. There's a shocking report that I just read a couple days ago. It was a memo to President Nixon from one of his closest advisors that outlined the dangers of climate change, said we've got to do something about this, otherwise, and this is almost a direct quote, goodbye Washington, goodbye New York, we don't have any data on Seattle.
Wow, I would love to see that. Our due process rights, I'm still, it's not, I mean, I understand the concept, but how does, due process is out of, is essentially out of this idea that if you are charged with something, you have access to the courts. I mean, we find these in the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th Amendments of the Constitution, or unless I'm misunderstanding due process itself. I don't see where it's explicit that the government can't harm you. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are from the Declaration, not the Constitution. What am I missing?
The due process clause has been interpreted for 2 centuries by American courts and the Supreme Court, and so case law has clearly defined individual liberties that are protected by the due process clause. And so some of those individual liberties, and there's many of them, but for example, personal security, family autonomy, equal protection. And so these are the liberties that courts over the past 2 centuries, and some are more modern, of course, have been determined to be protected under our Constitution by the due process clause. And so the specific one I'm mentioning is the right to not be put in affirmative danger by government is a very explicit one in the case law. In other words, government doesn't have the general obligation to make us safe all the time, but it cannot take actions that put us in direct and immediate peril, knowing that that is the result of this action. So
is it that we are subsidizing the fossil fuel industry that's doing this? I mean, that's an aggressive action that the government is taking. Or is it simply allowing them to do what they're doing, or both? There's actually a whole suite of government actions that the federal government takes every day.
So it's not just subsidies. It's approving export projects and promoting those export projects of huge, massive quantities of fossil fuel. It is opening public lands to coal mining and fracking and drilling. It's opening, in fact, President Trump just opened up more offshore waters to oil drilling. It's all of those actions combined. And so while the American public sometimes thinks that, lawsuits like this are trying to just force government to act, it's actually more preventing government from taking those affirmative actions on a daily basis that put us all in danger.
So that's the due process argument. The other argument is of government as essentially holding our environment in trust. Can you explain that?
Yeah, this goes back to, it's called an attribute of sovereignty. It actually goes back to Roman times and the Institutes of Justinian. The public trust has reflections in legal systems all around the world. And it's just a very basic premise that citizens can easily understand, that one of the very purposes of government is to protect the natural resources that society relies upon, and not protect it for just one generation or allow one generation to exploit those resources, but rather protect it as an endowment for future generations, which, by the way, are always coming into the present. Every time a baby's born, that was a future coming into the present. And so protect it as an endowment so that the country may endure. The founders of this country created the Constitution on the platform of the public trust. It was a well-known concept in England. It was imported into our law at a very early date in this country. One of the key cases was Illinois Central Railroad, which was 1892, but it was actually present in our legal system long before that. And so the premise is government just has to protect the resources we rely on for our survival so that the nation can endure. The founders didn't create the Constitution as a suicide pact.
So for somebody who is not schooled in the law and is trying to understand what we're talking about, can you give me an example of a time? I mean, is this, Teddy Roosevelt in the national parks? I mean, of when the government said, okay, we're going to act proactively on behalf of the public trust, as a trustee of the environment, of nature.
Sure. Well, typically it's the courts enforcing the public trust against government, because government is typically inclined to use its power for the benefit of private industries. So a great example is that Illinois Central case that I mentioned, and that was a case that arose when the Illinois legislature conveyed the entire Chicago waterfront to a railroad company. And the citizens back then in 1892 needed that waterfront for fishing and navigation and commerce. And the Supreme Court, in an opinion that is still the landmark opinion of this principle, said you can't do that. There are certain resources, including the shorefront, that are held in trust, implicitly held in public trust. And the legislature literally has no power to just give them away. The only time it can give them away is if it really promotes the purposes of the public trust and does not do substantial impairment to the remaining resources. So government, what the government is doing today is actually a repeat of Illinois Central in the atmosphere. It's sort of giving away public resources, fossil fuel resources, that are severely impairing our climate system.
Remarkable, remarkable. Mary Wood, you're doing God's work. I hope we can continue this conversation as time goes on. In fact, we didn't even have it. I'm sorry, we're hitting a hard break here. I can't control it. We haven't even talked about ourchildrenstrust.org. In fact, let's try to get you back right after the election. We'll continue the conversation. Is that all right?
Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much. ourchildrenstrust.org.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Professor Mary Wood, the Philip A. Knight Professor of Law and Faculty Director at the University of Oregon. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Boy, what a remarkable day. It's Halloween, right? I don't know what you're doing for Halloween. It's I'm guessing we live in an area where there's not a lot of kids, but I could be wrong. But anyhow, there's a few things in the news that I wanted to share with you. One is Rick Scott down in Florida. And, I know we've got a lot of viewers and listeners in Florida. And Rick Scott, he's got this giant outbreak of the red tide down there. And this didn't just like come out of nowhere, right? I mean, just consider, and what's amazing to me is that this information that I'm sharing with you, this coming from a Washington Post story by Daryl Fears and Lori Rosa, the data, the information about what Rick Scott did, which I think should be in the first 3 paragraphs, is like buried on the 3rd page of the article. Under Scott, this is almost to the very end of the article, under Scott, the budgets of state agencies that manage fresh water were cut by nearly $1 billion, and a steep drop in pollution enforcement cases coincided with the decimation of staff at the State Environmental Protection Department. They also note that Rick Scott has $240 million to burn. He's a very wealthy man. His company engaged in the largest Medicare fraud in the history of the United States. He made a lot of money. And then in his first term, again, this is from the Washington Post piece. Now, this is on the 2nd page. It's not quite so buried. In his first term, the state cut hundreds of millions of dollars from agencies that manage fresh water, laid off hundreds of workers in the Environmental Protection Department, squashed a deal to buy land from sugar farms that pollute water, and killed an attempt to increase inspections of septic tanks that soil water and contribute to the algae problem. So all these things are causing this red tide, and they were all things that actually the state was mitigating. They were in the process of regulating and controlling these things and trying to clean the state up. And Rick Scott came in and said, hey, screw that. We're here for industry, right? And if you want to pollute, hey, the ocean's a big place. So Rick Scott is saying, it's unfair to say that I'm responsible for these algae outbreaks. Red tide is naturally occurring. Well, yeah, it is. I mean, it's been going on since, Christopher Columbus noted it, but not like this. I mean, normally it's a little annoyance, but now it's costing the state hundreds of millions of dollars. The best guess for this year is $150 million in lost revenue because the beaches can't be used, because people don't want a vacation down there. I mean, literally, the water is poisonous. The water will burn you. The water could kill you. And, as a result of, as the Washington Post points out, Rick Scott cutting hundreds of millions of dollars from agencies that manage fresh water, laying off hundreds of workers in the Environmental Protection Department, and killing a deal which his predecessor had worked out to buy land from sugar farms that's polluting the water, and instead use that land to clean up the water, right? The marshland and stuff like that. In the saltwater areas, it's red. It's literally red. And in the freshwater areas, in the rivers and canals, it's blue-green algae. It's blue-green. But it's all the same thing. I mean, this is an explosion of growth by this. And if Rick Scott loses the Florida race, I mean, in part it'll be because Andrew Gillum's a great guy and a very, very competent politician. But in large part, it's going to be because of the environment, what we were just talking with Mary about. It's a little different case, but, it's about the environment. We'll be back. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Stick around. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. People who support our program there get, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com Facebook.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. What a day. Donald in Aurora, Illinois. Hey, Donald, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I'm watching the news, and I'm telling you, you might think I'm not right in saying this here, but I have a funny feeling we're not going to win this. We're not going to take the House or the Senate the way things are going. What I don't understand is we won the popular vote by 3 million votes. And not only that, though, too, we've also showed the so-called blue wave, which I was wondering, I got to thinking about, why is it all of a sudden that the blue wave is disappearing? And almost every single election is a tie with the Republicans. And that scares me because it seems like we always lose in these ties, too, or runoffs.
Yeah.
I don't understand. If we lose this time, we are finished as a party, the way I look at it.
Well, we'll see. I'm not willing to throw my hands up and freak out, Donald, but I am very concerned about what's going to happen here. The two major variables are both largely structural variables that we can't do anything about until we control the mechanisms of power, which will be at least 2.5 years from now. And, you know, because you have to control the White House and the Senate. But basically, these mechanisms that are being used are voter suppression, number one. We know, you know, in Wisconsin, they threw 100 and some odd thousand people off the voting rolls. And then with the ID law, 44,000 people, you know, showed up to vote and weren't allowed to. And Donald Trump won Wisconsin by 20,000 votes, for example. So you've got the voter suppression, number one, as a structural thing. And number two, you've got the Supreme Court having said that billionaires can throw all the money they want into elections. And right now you are watching ads on television that are funded directly or indirectly by the Koch network and other right-wing billionaires. Shelley Adelson just put $30 million in. The Robert Mercer and his daughter Rebecca putting money in. They're the ones who brought Trump to the White House. And so as long as we have this system where billionaires can pour money into elections and where red states, states controlled by Republicans, can continue to throw people off the voting rolls willy-nilly with no consequence of any, you know, no legal consequence, it's going to be a damn hard lift. But the fact of the matter is, Donald, as you pointed out, in the presidential race in 2016, Hillary Clinton won by 3 million votes, and that doesn't include voter suppression. If you were to include voter suppression, all the votes that people who tried to vote for Hillary Clinton and were turned away at the polls because they'd been purged or they didn't have the right ID, I'm guessing it was probably closer to 5 million that she won by. And number one. Number two, only about 40% of people who voted for the United States, for a United States senator in the 2016 election voted for a Republican. And yet the Republicans control the Senate because 2 senators for these little tiny red states. And then in the House of Representatives, it was about 47% of the, you know, because of gerrymandering. So we've got to fix this stuff, Donald.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
But the only way to fix it is to have political power. And right now, the only way to get that is to show up at the damn polls. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Unequal Protection, How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back by Thom Hartmann. This is from the introduction titled The Battle to Save Democracy. Excuse me. On September 2nd, 2009, the transnational pharmaceutical giant Pfizer pled guilty to multiple criminal felonies. It had been marketing drugs in a way that may well have led to the deaths of people and that definitely led physicians to prescribe and patients to use pharmaceuticals in a way that for which they were not intended. Because Pfizer is a corporation, a legal abstraction, really, it couldn't go to jail like fraudster Bernie Madoff or killer John Dillinger. Instead, it paid a $1.2 billion criminal fine to the U.S. government, the biggest in history, as well as an additional $1 billion in civil penalties. The total settlement was more than $2.3 billion, another record. None of Pfizer's executives, decision makers, stockholders, owners, or employees saw even 5 minutes of the inside of a police station or a jail. Most Americans don't even know about this huge and massive crime, nor do they know that the criminal never spent a day in jail. But they do know that in the autumn of 2004, Martha Stewart was convicted of lying to investigators about her sale of stock in another pharmaceutical company. Her crime cost nobody their life, but she famously was escorted off to a women's prison. Had she been a corporation instead of a human being, odds are there would not have even been an investigation. Yet over the past century, and particularly the past 40 years, corporations have repeatedly asserted that they are, in fact, persons, and therefore eligible for the human rights protections of the Bill of Rights. In 2009, the right-wing advocacy group Citizens United argued before the Supreme Court that they had the First Amendment right to free speech and to influence elections through the production and distribution of a slasher documentary designed to destroy Hillary Clinton's ability to win the Democratic nomination. Some political observers assert that they did this in part because they believed that a black man whose first name sounded like Osama and whose middle name was Hussein could never, ever possibly win against a Republican, no matter how poor a candidate they put up. In that, they were following on a 2003 case before the Supreme Court in which Nike claimed it had the First Amendment right to lie in its corporate marketing, a variation of the First Amendment right of free speech. Corporations haven't limited their grasp to the First Amendment. Pretty much any and virtually every amendment that could be used to further corporate interests has been fair game. As you'll learn in this book, in previous decades, a chemical company took to the Supreme Court a case asserting its Fourth Amendment right to privacy from the EPA, snooping into its illegal chemical discharges. Other corporations have asserted Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination, as well as asserting the 14th Amendment, passed after the Civil War to strip slavery from the Constitution, asserting that it protects their right against discrimination by a local community that doesn't want them building a toxic waste incinerator, commercial hog operations, or superstores. If this trend continues, it's probably just a matter of time before a corporation claims the Second Amendment right to bear arms anywhere, anytime, and your credit card company's bill collector shows up at your home with a sidearm. This legal situation is not only bizarre, but also quite the opposite of the visions for this country held by the founders of the nation and the framers of the Constitution. They were sufficiently worried about corporate power that they didn't even include in the Constitution the word corporation, intending instead that the states should tightly regulate corporate behavior, which the states did quite well until just after the Civil War. The American Revolution, you'll learn in this book, was in fact provoked by the misbehavior of a British corporation. Our nation was founded in an anti-corporate power fury. The most significant and oft-quoted precedent of the turning point of corporate power in America began just after the Civil War. It rested on a constitutional amendment successfully written and passed by a group of radical Republicans after the Civil War. That's what they called themselves, radical Republicans, to take slavery out of the Constitution. Given that today's Republican Party has, largely since the robber baron era of the 1880s, been the party of big business and the very rich, it's a bit difficult for some people to get their minds around the possibility that the Republican Party started out as a reform party, that for nearly 70 years, from before Abraham Lincoln until just after Theodore Roosevelt left the party to start a third party, had a strong progressive wing. But the Republican Party did. Although Lincoln was, by today's standards, a moderate Republican, he was still anti-slavery, pro-middle class, and pro-labor. In fact, he famously said labor is superior to capital because it precedes capital. Nobody has wealth until somebody makes something. And he was the first president both to use the word strike in public and to actually stop police and private armies from killing and beating strikers. And just like in today's mainstream Democratic Party, where there's a progressive minority that always seems to be pushing the edges, in the Republican Party of the 1800s, there was a very, even by today's standards, progressive faction. The radical Republicans were a splinter group that emerged in a big way from the Republican Party at its founding in 1854. And just after the Civil War in 1866, they gained a majority among Republicans in the House of Representatives, where they had a powerful influence until the faction disintegrated in the 1870s during the presidency of Ulysses S. Grant. They supported the absolute right of freed slaves to vote and participate in government. It goes on from there. Unequal protection, corporate power.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's Halloween. So, of course, time for, our Everything You Know Is Wrong. I don't have that on. Yeah, do we? Okay, here we go. Sometimes you know what you know, sometimes you know what you don't know, and sometimes, as the Firesign Theater said, everything you know is wrong. Is there a vampire apocalypse in our future? No, seriously, we've heard of zombies and things like that, but Douglas Robinson, vampire expert, thinks that a vampire apocalypse is possible. There you go. And he's the author of the vampire trilogy, the Silently series, which portrays fictional stories of real vampires. This author and expert on vampires, Douglas Robinson. Douglas, welcome to the program.
Thank you, sir, for having me.
So, are you a vampire?
No.
Tell me about vampires.
Well, when I say vampires, there's a whole range of behaviors and human blood drinkers and occultic people and so forth, but I use vampiric to describe people that are physically changed and they have to drink blood to live.
Okay, and you think that such people exist?
Yes.
I know that there is a genetic abnormality that happens in some people where they have to have basically massive amounts of iron in their diet, or they get anemic and they get very, very sick. And those people historically drank animal blood as, and ate a lot of meat, particularly organ meats that are rich in blood, as part of their diet just to keep from getting anemic. Is it possible that that's what you're talking about, or that that's the source of the vampire legend, or do you think this is something beyond, biology?
Like I say, I've had these people on my heart most of my life, and I've prayed for them most of my life, and I sought to understand. But like in 1983, I believe it was, I saw something. I essentially took a little fiction writing class that summer, and I saw what would be the essence of 16 novel-length stories, specifically about a vampiric girl named Macon, and at the time, her relationship with a young man named Thomas. Now, in the beginning, Thomas doesn't know who or what she really is, but he finds out in the first story what she really is. It really goes a lot deeper than this condition or that condition, and introducing you in the second story, rites of passage to the human blood drinkers, because there are also, the devil has had people out there from the beginning, whether they drink blood ritually or ceremonially, or they just like to hurt people or whatever. So it's a bigger tapestry of reasons and things than when you're a physical.
But you're talking about novels after taking a fiction writing course. That's a very different thing than saying, yes, I know this is true, I've met these people, or I have some evidence that they're out there. Do you have any
what I know about them mostly comes from the key character in the story
that you wrote?
And as right now, that's the best that I can give you.
Yeah. So then basically what you're saying is that you believe, do you believe that vampires exist, or did you want to just promote your novels?
No, the physically changed blood drinkers that I write about in my story do exist, I believe.
Okay, so what causes you to believe that?
Well, like I say, I prayed for them for a long time. The Lord gave me a couple of scriptures regarding them, and I can't say how I know what I know. I just know what I know.
So what does the Bible say about this?
What, who?
You said you've prayed for them. What does the Bible say about vampirism or vampirism?
Well, let me just read off a couple of scriptures for you to jot down and look at later.
Sure.
Okay, there's Joel chapter 2, verse 2.
Which says what?
I'll read. Let me just give you the list quickly.
Well, no, that won't do any good, because nobody's going to be writing this down while they're listening to the radio. And if we just, cite a bunch of scripture, people are just going to turn off their radio. I mean, what does the Bible say about vampires?
Okay, Joel 2, verse 2, a day of darkness and of gloominess, a day of clouds and of thick darkness. those specific aspects, darkness, gloominess, clouds, and thick darkness, as I explain it, is how the vampiric condition manifests.
Because vampires don't like light.
Well, I don't mean so much as light, but like I say, darkness represents mostly the occult.
Mm-hmm.
When Macon was attacked, her father had occultic runes, and he operated in fear most of his life, and that quote got it to stick to her.
This is in your novel.
Yes.
Yeah.
Gloominess is iniquity in the family line.
Yeah.
One of the characters that you meet had a desire to drink blood from his youth.
Okay.
And when he started drinking blood, he became vampiric in the truth sense.
Okay.
Clouds is what I call a partial conversion.
Okay, I got it. Douglas, thank you. Thank you so much for being with us today. Douglas Robinson, silently-publishing.com is the publisher, and the Silently series are the vampire trilogies that Douglas wrote. Let's get back to politics here. John in Niles, Michigan. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Tom.
Hey, John.
Yeah, as far as the dependence on fossil fuels, which is a major factor in global warming.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why not look into improving the electrical grid, like a Manhattan Project, to build hundreds of solar farms throughout the Southwest, Arizona, et cetera, even in Mexico, and perhaps even using some of these poor folks that are fleeing repression in Central America to give them a temporary visa to help build some of these along with U.S. citizens.
Yeah, I think that a WPA-level project to solarize and windize the United States is a brilliant idea. Are you familiar, John, with the 100,000 rooftop project that the Germans put into place in the late 90s or early 2000s?
I'm a little bit not very familiar, though.
Let me just summarize it real quick, because it's been a long time since I've done so, and I think it would be a brilliant model for the United States. Now, it was easier for the Germans to do because about 40% of their banks are public banks, and they were the ones participating in this. But we could backstop even commercial banks in the United States to do this. But basically, what they said was they wanted to. The power company knew, the German power system knew that they, over the course of the next 20 years, were going to need to build 2 new nuclear power plants. They were committed to no more coal-fired power plants, and they don't have any oil. Germany only has coal. And so what they did was they said, okay, what's the cost of 2 nuclear power plants? What's it going to cost to build these 2 nuclear power plants? And so just put that in your head for a minute. And so then what the deal that they worked out was, they said to the banks, if any homeowner wants to build a solar array on their roof, you will finance it at 2%, and we will 100% guarantee that. So that 2% is going to be 100% guaranteed profit to you, the bank. So you don't have to go to 4, 5, 6% because you're not going to have bad loans to worry about. So you get that 2%. Now, once people have put these things up on their houses, they borrow $10,000 and they put a solar array on their house, they're generating electricity. Then the government said to the power company, you're going to buy back that electricity, that electricity being generated off these rooftops. You're going to buy that electricity from these people for 7 times the normal retail price. So if normally electricity is going for 10 cents a kilowatt hour, you're going to buy it for 70 cents a kilowatt hour, because that's the amount that, when you take the cost of 2 nuclear power plants and you divide it by all the actual gross number of installations that would be required to generate the 2 megawatts of power that those 2 power plants would be creating, or whatever it was, that's what it would cost. So at the end of, say, a 10-year period, when all these mortgages have been paid off, and then the power companies just pay 1 to 1. Whatever if you sell it back, you sell it back for 10 cents a kilowatt, the same price you're buying it for. It's actually less than that, but you get the point. So at that point, you now own the solar system. You're now delivering the solar power. You've paid back the bank. The bank has made a profit. And the government, at the cost of 2 nuclear power plants, has more electricity than 2 nuclear power plants would produce. That was the idea. In fact, in Barcelona, Spain. I shared a stage with one of the two legislators. His name was Schmidt, who wrote this law. And he and I did a presentation there. I was talking about Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. It was about maybe 10 years ago. And that was so successful that they generated so much electricity that it was like the equivalent of more than 10 nuclear power plants in just a couple of years. And they were planning for 2 power plants over a 10-year period. So many people jumped into it because, hey, no risk, no cost, right? And it works out for everybody. Everybody wins. They were so successful at that they had to stop the program because their grid couldn't handle all the solar electricity that was coming into it. And so now Germany is going through the process of rebuilding their entire grid into a smart grid. So that is, you know, that kind of decentralized power. The power companies want centralized power. They want to have giant wind farms where they can take one line from it and sell that electricity to your house, or one giant solar farm where they can sell the electricity into a city. But this way, everybody owns their own electric source, and it is incredible in not only producing electricity really, really cheap. There was a day this last summer where Germany produced 100% of their power, and they run their trains on electricity and everything, 100% of their power simply from solar power. And Germany, by the way, is the cloudiest country in Europe. They're cloudier than Michigan, where I grew up, where half the year it's IFR. So that's how they did it, John. And I think that, you know, if we combined that with a WPA kind of program like you're talking about, we could kick this thing, you know, we could make this happen in 3 or 4 or 5 years, and it would produce an industrial boom in the United States, manufacturing the solar plants. I mean, you know, so yeah, I salute you, John. That's a great idea, and you know, I think that we should pull it off. I think, you know, Germany can do it. We can do it. Come on, we rebuilt their country, or we helped them rebuild their country. It's not like we're helpless here, you know, before this task, to paraphrase John Kennedy. Anyhow, it's 46 minutes past. They're coming up on 46 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. The elections are getting tight. A lot of people, you know, jumping in and helping out. So we'll be right back with more of your calls.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And we will be checking in with Talk Media News in 4 minutes and finding out what's going on in the world. Stick around. And welcome back. Paul in Glenside, Pennsylvania, watching us via Roku. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to address the blue wave and some of the structural obstacles you were talking about that, you know, can suppress it or maybe, you know, have it actualize and be part of the political landscape. In Pennsylvania, we had notorious gerrymandered congressional districts which were fought in a long, hard battle with 2 organizations, the League of Women Voters, which I'm sure operates across just about, you know, overall the United States.
Yeah, they're nationwide.
And Fair Districts, PA, and I'm sure there's probably similar organizations, Fair District, whatever. They got the courts to agree to redraw or to force the state to redraw their boundaries. And the county I live in, Montgomery County, used to be 5 separate congressional districts, and none of them had anyone from Montgomery County. And we have over 800,000 people here, and not one person from our county representing us. Now, our entire county, 97%, the population is 1 congressional district, and it's about to go into the Democratic Party column. And this is probably the case for 5, maybe up to 6 or 7. On top of the already existing 5, which are pretty solid Democratic strongholds in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Scranton. When you do take these structural impediments away, the voter suppression, gerrymandering, you know, various, you know, tricks of political ledgermending that the Republicans have been using, you're going to see a blue wave. Now, what's happening in other areas of the country, I don't know. I don't want to make predictions. Yeah. But it's almost impossible to ignore the overwhelming facts of how strong the Democratic candidates are now that the districts have been drawn to include, you know, common sense political boundaries and not carving everything up to shove Republicans in to majority positions.
Yeah, and
we're having a blue wave not because we're on the right side of history, not because it's God's will, not because of astrological Mercury retrograde. We're having it because we got rid of political obstacles in the form of gerrymandering, and I think other states are also going to be following suit.
It's on the ballot in Michigan right now, Paul. It's literally on the ballot in Michigan to do it like California, to create a nonpartisan independent commission to redraw the boundaries, the congressional boundaries, because the gerrymandering is not just used to keep the House. And correct me if my memory is wrong. My recollection was that while Pennsylvania more or less votes 51, 52% Democratic, 48, 49% Republican. You were sending 13 Republicans and 5 Democrats to the House of Representatives. Am I remembering that right?
You're remembering that right, but it's even worse. There's over 1 million more registered Democrats than Republicans, and year in and year out, if you added up in the congressional races all the votes cast for the Democrats, it was always outnumbering them by hundreds of thousands.
Right.
We literally had a mirror image of what our true representation should have been by political party.
Yeah, it's like the old Superman Bizarro, world kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Paul, inside out, Alice through the looking glass. Paul, thanks for the call. Thanks so much. We'll be back. Bob Ney is going to drop by with Talk Media News, and my apologies to the folks holding on to get on the air. This will be the last segment of the day. We'll pick up your phone calls tomorrow. Bob Ney will be right with us. Stick around. Hey, thanks so much for your support for the Thom Hartmann Program, along with your support for Free Speech TV. We deliver our program, of course, to commercial stations, which is how we pay our bills through the revenue from running advertising, and you can learn more about those at our website at thomhartmann.com. But we also share our program with non-commercial outlets, from Free Speech TV to Pacifica stations all over the country. And because with the Pacifica radio stations, there's basically no revenue coming in, the way that we support our nonprofit outreach is in large part through Patreon. And, over at Patreon, people who support our program at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. People who support our program there get, special little clips, and there's a few other goodies, behind the scenes kind of stuff. But that's principally, if you want to support the Thom Hartmann Program, that's the way to do it, is to get over to patreon.com/Thom Hartmann and check out what we're doing and support our program. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do. On the line with us is the author of Sideswiped, former Congressman Bob Ney. Bob, welcome back to the program.
Well, thank you, Tom.
So, first of all, before we get into the news, I would love to hear, you were a member of Congress for years. You were inside the Republican Party. You're outside it now. What's your thought on the state of politics here 1 week out from the election?
Well, the Republican Party has, in my opinion, tried to kind of be quiet in the sense that they can't control President Trump. He goes about doing whatever he does. I know from the inside still that members are just almost hysteric because, they are trying to run their campaigns. He does something. He says something. You and I can name 10 things and take up your entire show of what he's done in the last week. They also don't have a record really to run on. They haven't been able to accomplish much. So I think that a lot of the Republicans have given up on the House. They're trying to salvage themselves. Now, I would note, though, it's about voter turnout. And I tell friends of mine, Democratic consultants, who say, well, this is done. I say it's not done by any stretch of imagination.
Well, and the other question I have for you, Bob, is the question that I'm always screaming at the TV whenever a TV talking head is interviewing a pundit or a politician, and they never ask this damn question. It makes me absolutely nuts. What impact do you think voter suppression is going to have on this election? We know, for example, in the last presidential election, over 100,000 people were thrown off the voting rolls in Wisconsin. Trump won by 20,000. Over 100,000 people were thrown off the voting rolls in Michigan, maybe over 200,000. And Trump won by, what, 14,000? Same thing in Pennsylvania, same thing in Florida. It was voter suppression in 2000, throwing 90,000 African Americans off the voting rolls by Jeb Bush that got his brother George, within 500 votes of the presidency.
Correct.
What impact is voter suppression, this election fraud that the Republican Party has been running since the 1980s? What impact is that going to have on this election?
Well, I think it's going to have a big impact because, look, again, and you know it and I know it, it is about turnout. Now, we can talk about Trump and all the things he's done in the last, couple of years or last week, but it's still going to be about voter turnout.
And you can't turn people out who've been thrown off the voting rolls.
You can't, right. You can't turn them out. If they've been thrown off the voting rolls, people, get disgusted by the system, et cetera. They don't show up to vote, can't get them out. Yeah. Then the Republicans will squeak by, which is what they're hoping to do.
Right.
I mean, they're hoping to squeak by.
Amazing. So what's in the news today?
Well, I've been talking about elections, exactly that type of thing. About the one thing that should worry the Democratic side would be a medium turnout, and that should be scary. They've got to have a high turnout. Voters have to be able to vote. A lot of money is going to be spent, and right now the articles are talking about how much more the Democratic side has raised than the Republican side, and frankly, that's good in itself, but it doesn't count if you look at the voter suppression, if you look at...
Well, I've also seen those numbers, and they don't include dark money. So you've got the Koch brothers who just dumped $300 million, and most of it's being poured in this month in these vicious ads that we're seeing on TV, and nobody is counting that because it's not going to a campaign. So they say, oh, the Democrats are raising more money than the Republicans. I'm sorry, $300 million? Really?
Right. And there's a lot, and you're right, and there could be money spent from now forward. That's the other thing. This is a lifetime in politics. Yet I know it's around the corner. So I think it's something that's got to be watched, and what happens at the polls. The Democratic side has done a great job. In fact, some of the farm team, I call it, there's money out there through some of the PACs supporting the Democratic side that are helping state legislatures because they're focusing on pre-existing conditions. Republicans can't win on that of what they have done or not done with pre-existing conditions.
Oh, they voted, 70 times to deny people, coverage for pre-existing conditions?
and it's a biggie. And I will tell you this, there are tons of Republicans that, they're not all the healthy side. I mean, there are tons of Republican citizens who are out in the cold because of pre-existing conditions.
Right.
And so when you start
and they're all in red states, by the way.
Right, and they're on the wrong side of that issue.
Yeah.
And also Medicare for all. That's been pretty successful, I think, with the with the Democratic side. So the issues, I think, are in the hands of the Democratic side, and I think it's theirs to lose. They've got to be very careful. And again, you mentioned voter suppression. Look at the history of it, and when you do, elections are held in ways and won in ways people didn't think they would be.
Yeah, well, for 240 plus years, voter suppression has been the principal tool used by wealthy white people to hang on to political and economic power in this country.
Correct.
Bob Ney, author of Sideswiped. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you so much.
Great talking with you. And thank you for being with us today. It's been a fascinating day. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. And in the meantime, don't forget, this is the most consequential election, certainly of my lifetime. I don't know if it's the most important one in the history of the Republic. Probably not, but who knows? Our Republic has been very badly endangered, think Civil War, but this is important. So get out there. We can't just sit around and complain. You got to get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.